What's up, my fellow poker enthusiasts? It's Rene, aka the Wacko here, and together with my co-host Adam Carmichael, we represent to you the Mechanics of Poker podcast. In this podcast, we deconstruct high-stakes poker players, figuring out what it is about them, how they think, what they do that makes them so successful, with an extra focus on the obstacles they faced and the skills they had to develop to surpass them. Over the years, me and Adam have gained a lot of experience in both reaching high-stakes poker ourselves and teaching other players to do the same. We have bundled all this knowledge together in our coaching program, The Mechanics of Poker, which is the most complete poker coaching product on the market. If you want to have a chance to work with me and Adam so you can get unstuck and make more progress in your poker career, go over to mechanicsofpoker.com to apply. But without further ado, let's learn from another high-stakes player's journey in today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Mechanics of Poker podcast. Today, in our pod, we have another very fast riser. To my knowledge, the fastest riser we have had on so far. He plays in the high-stakes scene, cash games, very impressive. It took 24-year-old Owen only 2 years to establish himself at 2550. While playing both heads up and 6 max cash games. That's very impressive. You might have recently heard of him as he took on the 100k heads up challenge against Doug Polk, where he ended up a slight winner over the course of 2 matches. Adam, balancing 2 game types. 1 is already hard enough, let alone 2.
Yeah, it's impressive at his young age to have success in 2 formats. And I always think these young fast risers, there's a lot to learn from. They have a lot of confidence. They approach poker in a different way. They fast-tracked their learning curve to be able to learn the game at an impressive speed. So yeah, really excited to see what we can learn from Owen on his rise to the top.
Yeah, me too. I'm sure there will be a lot of knowledge again in this podcast. But before we get into it, I would like to give a big shout out to our sponsor, GTO Wizard.
We are proud to announce a technological breakthrough. Introducing GTO Wizard AI. This powerful technology can solve any custom poker spot in seconds to high accuracy. Unlike pre-solved solutions, this allows you to edit the solving parameters. That means you can modify the ranges, change the stack and pot sizes, customize the betting tree, and automatically simplify and optimize your bet sizes. Brace yourself. The meta is about to change.
So sign up to gtowizard.com using the link below, gtowizard.com/mechanics to get 10% off your first month and join the weekly coaching webinars, of which 1 every month is with me. Looking forward to educating you guys there. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode. There he is, Owen. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Owen, I've seen you on the high stakes cash game streets, and more recently, I saw you on YouTube taking on Doug Polk in his 100k heads up challenge. 2 obvious questions kind of follow. How did it go? That's obviously what everyone wants to know who didn't follow it. And what led you to take on the challenge?
So in terms of how it went, well, I mean, obviously in the immediate aftermath, it kind of felt pretty shit like the day after, because I was up so much and then finished sort of close to break even, like up like about half a buy-in or something in the end. But then also, like, you know, I ran insanely well the first day. I was kind of doing some run bad in the second day. So I thought that was like kind of fair. And once I had a bit of distance from it, I was just like really happy with the whole experience. I had a great time. Like, yeah, Doug's like great fun. Like, it's not just a on-camera thing. I mean, like, we were playing some like PLO and some like, I think it was like a 1-3 game afterwards. It was yeah, funny going over to that from 200 400 and yeah, like meeting some of the guys down there. Like it was all a great time. Like a bit disappointed with how I played on the second day. Like during the first day, I was really happy with the whole thing. I remember, like, I was talking to Doug afterwards, and I was talking about how it's often kind of a shame that, like, you know, all of the top players sort of battle behind closed doors. I mean, especially now that it's all on ACR, it's harder to rail than it was when it used to be on Stars back in the day. And so he was saying that he kind of thought of this as like that sort of like highlight of of like premium, like top tier poker content, like whole cards up. And yeah, I was thinking in the aftermath, this was like this was the exact kind of stream which, if I wasn't being a part of it, I would have absolutely loved to watch it. Like, it was like we were really going for it. I thought like the aggression from both of us was really high. Like, we weren't handing any pots to each other. We were slipping in bits of strap talk just because you get into that you get into that rhythm. And so yeah, I thought it was yeah, I was really happy with everything, to be honest.
Did you have any prior experience to playing live? Obviously, this was a live challenge. You also mentioned, yeah, obviously variance is going to play a big part. I don't know how many hands you ended up playing, but it's probably not going to be a lot. So did you feel comfortable in the live setting, and also in terms of the setting of the fact that people can see your whole cards, you get a lot of exposure?
Yeah, I think honestly, the worst thing about live is having to keep mentally calculating the pot. Like that was the thing which drove me nuts. I think it was kind of relaxing, especially playing Doug, because I just know that unless he's been living a lie for so long at this point that it would almost be impressive. Like, he's not the guy who's using live towels or like timing towels or stuff like that. So it was like nice that I wasn't paranoid about that sort of stuff. Obviously, I was trying to be, consistent with the stuff and not just give stuff away just for the sake of it. But it was nice not to have like that in the back of my head, driving me insane, and that I could just focus on the poker, because I have very little experience live. Like, I've played some live tournaments and like done terribly in them for the most part. Like some live cash, but like very little experience. So this was one of the first times really playing properly live.
It's always quite interesting when you're the one handing out these challenges, because I don't know if so, how you prepared for a match, but I can imagine that you've probably watched the previous matches that he played. So I think if you're in Dog shoes, or in general the challenger, then usually before, or same with, for example, with Galfond, right? He also does like these heads-up challenges. I assume that players going into a challenge, they must have analyzed the previous challenges to get kind of an idea of they can pick up on something.
Like, I have a spreadsheet on my laptop of like every single mistake I expected him to make, and it's like very extensive. So obviously I come in with an advantage in that sense, but also the thing is about playing like him specifically, he's a very theory-oriented player. So like, whilst he has consistent mistakes in his game, he's also like he's not getting super wildly out of line. So like the maximum amount that you can own him for by having a good read in the spot is quite small compared to some other players. So I think like he's sort of well suited to being able to do that. Like, there are other players who I think would have a harder time like continuing to face opposition.
Yeah, so the bigger deviations you make, the bigger holes you think you have in your game, or the further you play from theory, the more you become exploitable, I guess. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, and like he's like incredibly open about like things he's not doing. Like he just says stuff like, oh, like, I think people who try to play raises here, like, it's just unnecessary, it's just not a part of my game. And like, he just like freely admits that, and he's like comfortable knowing that you have that information, and he just has like the confidence in his strategy that it's gonna play well enough anyway.
And with everything he says, your mind automatically goes into the solver node lock. Like, okay, wait, you don't have raising. This will be the consequence of my strategy.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like it was weird because especially as we got deeper into the match, I was waiting for the adjustment in some spots, because I was just like, okay, I was aware of when I'd had illegal showdowns, or perhaps spots where like I tanked for ages with a hand which should just be folding, and like, even if I did eventually fold, like, I was like, okay, maybe this gives away that I was thinking about something, maybe he's going to change it up. But he didn't really seem to adjust that much, which sounds like weird considering he smashed me on the second day, and like, I did really well on the first. But it was like, I think he was like mostly playing in yeah, he wasn't really like getting into that leveling game at all, and I think I was just like wasting energy on it. To be honest, like trying to anticipate that stuff.
I'm curious. Maybe in the future we will try to get Doug on and ask how he sees it, like from the opposite point of view. Like I said, basically putting yourself out there, making yourself available to play against, and the likely preparation people will do before getting into a match like that. I don't know. Maybe he also said, "Well, Owen. Let's talk about Owen. I've seen all his online hands." You never know. You never know. Maybe
I streamed a bit the day before me playing Daryl. And he like popped into this stream where it's like I have like, I don't know, 50 viewers or something, and then he popped in and one of my mates was just like, "Oh, Doug's watching a stream." I was like, "Oh shit, don't give too much away." Like yeah. But yeah, I mean also just from talking to him about it, because I sort of joked to him afterwards because like he was saying I'm welcome to come back again at some point if I'm like in America. I was just like, "Oh yeah, sure, because yeah, I had a great time, it'd be fun." Like I was joking that the goal was to play well enough that he wouldn't invite me back. But he was just saying like it's not much of an open challenge if you're like excluding anyone, and he just enjoys the competition.
Yeah,
like
he doesn't care. Also, with the amount of hands that you play, how much in EV BB per 100 can you actually lose?
Yeah, exactly. Like
and it probably makes up for the fact that it's his own brand, and it's very hard for him to do this minus.
He also gets he like gets a rebate from it stirring up action, you know, like for every time there's a match where like, you know, I go play him, or like, you know, K-Rab goes and plays him. Like having said that, I think he outplayed K-Rab from what I watched the match, but like, you know, someone else like gets in the mood, like sees what's going on, goes, yeah, I could play there, like who's like not a heads up specialist.
This was heads up. You play both 6 max and heads up, and I wanted to quote something that you mentioned in the questionnaire. You said, "Anytime someone quits me heads up, I almost feel high." What is it about, like specifically heads up that gives you that type of thrill?
Yeah, I think it's like because heads up, it's so clearly just like you versus this other person, and like you're just like you're sat there pitted against each other in a fight, like trying to outthink each other, and there's both this competition of like, okay, whose base strategy is winning before the adjustments, and then like the race to out adjust each other, like how can I pick up on what he's doing wrong before he picks up on what I'm doing wrong. And then there's often this feeling of like, you know, once you get the hang of someone, that you're just running circles around them, and like they're constantly in spots where they're experiencing pain, like they're always in the tank. They don't really know what's going on, whereas like to you, you're like in this like flow state and like playing really fast. And I think, you know, when that moment comes and they just decide it's done, and then like, yeah, the realization that someone's like this person thought like they thought there was EV in playing me, and now they've just decided that this is like too expensive to keep trying to find out. Yeah, it just feels, I don't know, it's like a like a huge ego boost. I think it's sort of like, yeah, it ties it. One of the reasons that I got into poker was because like basically I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in my life, and like, but I wanted to do something where I could like really like push myself and see like, you know, I was like, I knew I was a smart guy, but I was like, you know, I want to like actually know how smart I am. Do you know what I mean? Rather than just sit there and go like, you know, and I was just like, well, this is like a fairly like objective measure of that. And also like no one gets a head start on you, you know, like I pissed about when I was a teenager, I didn't work on exams, and I was like, you know, I'm in this field where it's just like, oh, I'm not up against some some prodigy since they were 10 years old, you know, I get to
yeah. So basically the win only counts if you're up against fair competition, basically, and the fairer the competition gets, the more, I would say, satisfying so basically if you feel a high if someone quits, how do you feel then if you quit, or you just
I don't quit.
Okay. That's a way to avoid the feeling if you just never quit.
Like there are there are people who I go into it with the attitude of like there are people who I'll play who I know I'm losing to. And it's just like I'm just interested. Yeah, I like if Linus would play 5K, I'd play him for a bit. But like I'm not gonna play some huge match. But like once I'm committed to playing someone, I mean, I say this, I haven't been playing for that long, but like there's like I think there's like no one who I'm turning down action from at the moment. Like I just want to play everyone. It helps as well that I'm like running like really well out the gate. So like that gives you the confidence to just go and like sit basically everyone. I said I say this well yeah I mean I basically yeah if anyone wants to play at 5K like I'm down to play. Like if someone wants some match at like 40K, obviously it's a different thing. I have to I have to be pretty confident that I'm winning there, but like just to play at the stake which I'm playing like day to day, and like like you were saying with the Doug match, if I'm playing for, if we've not playing like a huge amount of hands, like how much EV am I really losing by like competing against this person? But yeah, like so far there's been no one I quit. Like I temporarily quit Daryl when I first played him because he ran such circles around me that I was completely lost. But now I like tentatively like okay yeah let's play Daryl some more. Like I'm running well enough against everyone else that if he smacks me for a buy-in or two, we can we can get it back.
What do you mean with run circles?
I was like, it was just there were spots where I was so used to I had sort of like these assumptions about how people were going to think about them, and like there were lines which I just wasn't used to seeing. It was like you kind of know this line exists, but you sort of like discount it in your thought process a bit. Like I was getting like 5-bet on the river by him, and like actually not knowing what to do. It wasn't some spot where it's just like, oh well, obviously he fucking has it at this point. No, it was like I was actually just sitting there like he he could have bluffs here, and like yeah, he was just playing at like a very consistently high aggression level, and I wasn't that comfortable dealing with it because I hadn't played anyone. Like I played some spewy people, but like he had like control to his aggression, and it was yeah, and I was just like so aware of how out of my depth I was like instantly. So I was just like, so it was like unsatisfying. It was unsatisfying to play. If someone's beating you by a little bit, then to me that feels very motivating to try and close that gap. Like if I'm losing at 5 BB to someone, then it's just like, okay, yeah, but like I don't feel like I've peaked as a player. So to me that's like, okay, well we can get it to even, and then if I can get it to even, I can get it to beating them. But like there, I was just like I didn't even know how much I was losing, but I just felt completely lost.
I was going to say it
good
feels a bit like
motivation.
the sense of where that you don't know kind of where you're at, right? With okay, there's
Yeah.
a bunch of these things going on. I'm not really sure where I'm at. At least if you know that you're -5, you know where I'm gonna be 0. But if you're like, I have no clue if I'm
Yeah.
-10, -5, +5, I have no clue.
When
Kind
I
of
Well, no, when I first played him, like -5 was like the upper bound of, of what I felt I was losing at. It was funny as well because like someone else who like they sharked me at every single time I'd moved up stakes, right? So I played this guy at like when I first played 500 NL, like because I'd always battle, like I'd sit on the tables to heads up, like I wouldn't quit. And like I'd lost so much to this guy total. I think I'm down the most in big blinds to this guy by anyone else by a mile. And then like he quits me without barely like didn't even lose any of it back. He just goes nah. Like he says something about like he's mixing he doesn't want to mix heads up in 6 max. Like okay, fair enough, but like he doesn't want to play. And then and then he messages Daryl and goes, oh, by the way, and like, well, he puts us in some group chat and goes, oh, by the way, like this Owen guy, like he basically plays anyone, by the way. I'll leave you two to it. And I felt like I was just aware of like I was aware of what's going on, but I was just like I was too curious to see what the gap was. I was like, I need to go, I need to go play him. And now I feel like it's like, okay, like, there's a pretty decent chance he's still winning, but it's like it feels like a fight now, you know. So which is more satisfying to me, because then I can go away from it and like I can look and review things and see if I can come back the next session better and feel confident about it.
This is very much against, I would say, over the years, it's become way more common for people to have very high on the list that they have to look for and only playing games where they have an edge. You clearly have a different attitude, knowing that you have -5 BB win rate, you're still willing to go in. So what is it about? What is in it for you? Is it purely the challenge?
You know, like that story that everyone tells about Linus, where he'd quit if the fish came.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I've experienced it. Yes.
Yeah.
What the fuck is this guy doing?
George Frogger, like you mad bro, told me that story years ago when I was first playing 500 now. He was telling me I need to get better game selection, and I was actually just inspired by it. I was just like, yeah, that's the kind of player I want to be. I was like, but I also think it's kind of just in my nature, like, because back when I was, like, the reason I learned heads up was sort of by accident. Like, it was back November time. I'd been on like a huge downswing for like the past year. I was sort of like starting to come out of it, and I was thinking about what is it that gets me playing my best possible poker, because I think like Yuri talked about this when he was on the podcast, and he feels like he has like a +15 BB winner and like a -10 BB loser within him, and I feel like that's kind of how I play as well. And I was thinking, well, what gets me to playing in that state of mind where like I feel invincible, and it's like not thinking about all that background stuff. It's just like I'm just here to like play and like beat who you put in front of me. So I just had this sort of I just had this mentality of like I was just gonna play anyone that came and like not worry about fish games. I was just like reg battling all night. And it would be like 300, and then sometimes it would go to heads up, and I was just like, okay, well, I'm not gonna quit just because it's heads up. And I started playing it, and I was just like really enjoying it. I was just playing like kind of for fun at first, just for battling, and then it's like, you know, you get into enough spots that you're curious about, run some sims, and then like sort of backs, and it's like, oh, I'm kind of studying this format now, and then like it was interesting enough that I was just yeah. I mean, I'm still like playing more in terms of six max, because obviously like heads up is like it's a bit inconsistent, whereas six max you can get action all the time. But it's like in terms of what is most fun to me, like I was immediately just like, oh yeah, this really gets me feeling like passionate about the game to go out and battle with people.
I wanted to touch on another thing that you mentioned. You mentioned that you think that the sport aspect of poker is often overshadowed by the gambling side of it. Could you maybe elaborate?
Yeah. So that's kind of like an indirect shot at Hustler Casino, but like I don't like, it's not like I have a problem with that stuff existing, but it's like it's like you compare it to chess, right? You know, for like if you look at chess coverage, you don't have coverage of like, oh, two billionaires are playing, like the winner gets 100K every match, like every game, and like they play like a 10-game match or whatever. Like that doesn't, you know, you don't see that in chess. You see it's like the top guys versus the other top guys, and it's appreciation of how beautiful the game can be when played at such a high level. And I mean, obviously, it's the nature of poker, because like the money has to come from somewhere, and also like top players, like of course, like kind of secretive about their strategy. So it's like no one wants to be the guy who's volunteering, you know, all of this stuff. Like I was kind of tempted to do some streaming, because you know I feel like I would enjoy that aspect of it. But it's also like if I just play with my whole cards revealed all the time in like a small pool of like high stakes players, even if it's not like heads up, if I'm just playing six max with every single like whole cards revealed, it's like people, these are really smart guys who are going to use that information. And so yeah. So like I understand why it is that way, but I think it's a real shame, because I think there's like so many interesting things happening in poker, and I think I think like people, well, I know that people would find it so interesting, but it's kind of a shame that that sort of side of it is hidden, and it's like, you know, the only thing we can celebrate is sort of like the big pots and like the emotions of people going on these massive swings.
Yeah, I think it's also, I mean, the content that's being put out there is mainly constructed in a way that the mass audience consumes it, right? What the mass audience likes is what we start to produce. Like Hustle Casino apparently produces a format that the mass audience like. I think, for example, the format that you did with Dog is way closer to a chess format where it's basically you're watching and you're interested in high level strategy and a certain amount of intelligence. But I haven't checked the numbers, but I would imagine that, I don't know, Max Payne 1 million buy-in hustler event probably attracts a way bigger audience, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's like, it's like you can't force people to like something, but I just think it's a shame that like they're clearly, you know, there are YouTube channels out there which are like trying to cover strategy content, but it's like often the guys who are doing it are not super high level guys, you know, like whereas
Bang bang.
it's like, well, it's just like, I mean, who's giving away their strat for free who plays like high stakes online? Like I mean, like well, I mean, like Doug has like, you know, Doug had like the upswing stuff even when he was still like playing regularly, but I think like that was kind of the exception. Like there are some like, I don't know, there's like 1K guys and stuff, but like you don't have it in the same way where like, you know, chess on some day, like even if Magnus isn't streaming, there's like multiple GMs like streaming, like talking, like being instructive, and it's really cool to see how they think. Whereas like you don't get to go onto Twitch and then see like Stefan talking about how he's piecing everyone up and like, you know, these insane lines he's running. You sort of just get to see the line and then it's just like, you know, was this good? And it's like, oh, I guess it was because it was Stefan, but you know, like I feel like I mean, as someone who's like looked at so many of his hands, they definitely, like, even if you're really good at poker, they're like kind of inaccessible. Like you have to spend time on them. Whereas, and it would be really cool to hear people talk about that. But obviously, you know, I see why they can't. It's just a shame that that's the way the game works.
Yeah, if I talk from experience, let's say, for example, you stream or you make a video, let's say you can play a hand, and I feel like it's mainly in the way you explain it that could get kind of the aha across to the other person. So let's say I make a video for YouTube. I might explain it. I might play the hand exactly the same. I'll show how I play the hand, but how I would explain the hand, I might keep some information aside, or I will use a different argument that's less valuable than if I would be doing it in a coaching session, for example, or when I talk with other guys who I do strategy with. I will explain it in a way different way that's like, oh, actually this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and of course it's just like you kind of like this information has like so much EV, and it's like not even just within the one person adjusting, right? Like there's like this whole audience. Like there are some streamers who I watched back when I was playing like you know, like back when I was playing like 500 NL or whatever, and it was like it was also telling what they wouldn't notice. You know, like sometimes you could get like a really detailed picture of someone's leaks just by the things that they missed, and so then it's kind of like, well, yeah, like most of the people who stream have something to promote, or like they're playing mid stakes, and it doesn't mean like they're terrible players, but it you know, like especially if you're like playing 25 an hour and like there's a 500 Zoom streamer, like there's clearly like some usefulness in that, but it's just like seeing the guys like at the absolute top where like they're playing like, you know, what the fuck hands like multiple times a session, and it would be amazing to hear about the dynamics which went into all these like adjustments and counter adjustments, but you kind of just have to like guess at it if you're a viewer.
Yeah, I think also when you're playing and putting your content out there, either streaming or recording, I mean, when you make an adjustment or counter adjustment, you can always just say that the dice told you to do it. So if you mentioned that you stream, I can tell you from experience, if you want to do something always or never, you just say, oh, the dice rolled this way, or the dice rolled that way, or you can make up a lot of excuses. You mentioned chess briefly as well. I believe you have a history in chess as well, pre-poker.
Yeah. I mean, when I was younger, I played for the England junior team, which is kind of fun. I mean, like, yeah, we got a trip to Disneyland out of it. Which is
highlight of the chess career, trip to Disneyland.
Yeah. No, like, yeah. I mean, there were probably some good wins in there, but that's the bit which sticks out in my mind. But yeah, that was when I was like I was playing like international tournaments from like 11 to 14 years old, and then I retired. I decided I was kind of sick of it. I think I was just like because like the way I'd always learned, I like learned by playing. I just played, like I played tons and didn't really do much theory work. And then, but like that only takes you so far, right? There is a point where you need to sit there with the engine and work out exactly what's going wrong with your games. But yeah, I wasn't really interested in that. And then it's like, okay, well, people are starting to leave me behind. And like if I couldn't compete, it wasn't like I needed to, it wasn't like I needed to be like beating everyone all the time. Like I definitely wasn't like the top guy in England or anything. But it was like, if you can't, like these people who used to be able to like give a good game and like take a game off them occasionally, and it's just like, they're just like completely outplaying me, and I don't want to put in the work to stay in touch with them. So yeah. But like that was one of the things which got me like motivated later on to pursue to pursue poker, was because I didn't want to like look back on that and go, like I could have been a grandmaster if I put in the effort, like it's like the classic like talking about potential as if it's achievement. And so that was something which I really wanted to I really didn't want to have like hanging over me, because it wasn't like I regretted like giving up on chess specifically, but I didn't want to just end up doing something that wasn't entirely satisfying and just like have a bunch of excuses to anyone that would listen. I'd rather just go out there and like do something and and like just prove it to myself like that.
You actually mentioned also, like, if you want to get better in chess, you have to sit down with the engine. I don't know much about chess, but I was looking at some matches and I would heard some commentators, and they were indeed also consulting the solver to see what the solver is doing. Actually, also maybe that's something also for that they can add in like live streams, that we can put up the solver and say, actually the solver doesn't really agree with this. Just like they maybe do in chess, maybe that we can make it a bit more intellectually stimulating, I guess. What similarities do you see in chess that come back in poker that maybe gave you a little bit of a head start when you got into poker?
So I would say like the main similarity is you have to take sort of you have to take something which is like very specific when you look at a chess engine, where it will tell you just the right move, and like poker will tell you the right frequency. And then you have to turn that into something abstract, which you can apply to like not just this position or this hand, but something which you could actually like add to your game as a whole. And so like adding like the development of heuristics. I'd say like the main difference though is that like chess has this this continuity that poker doesn't. Like chess is like building to a crescendo in a sense of like it's like you're applying pressure. You're applying pressure over 30 moves or something to try and make someone crack, whereas like poker's like death by 1,000 cuts, which is that's how they end up differing.
Adam, you into chess or ever been into chess?
I was when I was younger. I've got an older brother, and my dad was quite competitive at chess, but definitely wasn't representing my country at chess. But I did find the strategic kind of heads up dynamic, like Owen's been describing. There's something primal about playing another person, whether it's chess or heads up poker, one-on-one. When it's like your strategy against their strategy, either I win, you lose, or vice versa. And there's something very rewarding about out-maneuvering someone, whether it's on the chessboard or in a heads-up dynamic, which is quite intense, but also very rewarding, and especially from the ego point of view, to outthink somebody, outsmart someone, and create a winning strategy against them creates this good feeling. So I can definitely relate to Owen's high that he gets from getting opponents to quit. That was definitely some of my high moments, where when someone quit after a long battle, I was like, yes, that's a great day.
Do you think it's also like a certain necessity increase when you play heads up? So let's say, for example, you play a ring game. Usually what can happen is you might play against, there's a guy at the table or two guys that you think are better than you. There's two other guys who you think you're better at. And there's the recreational you can get the money from. So you could be like, okay, well, I'm mainly going to focus on the recreational. That's where the main money comes from. But if you play heads up, let's say it's just me versus Owen. I mean, if I want to make this a win, there's only one opponent where I can take the money from. So I think it maybe also raises a certain amount of necessity that you actually have to think like, okay, well, if I have to get the money from Owen, I have to now really sit down and see how I'm going to figure this out. So I think maybe the nature of heads up also steers your brain in a certain direction. It's like, listen, this is the way you have to get through this. So you get stimulating. Whereas maybe in a 6-max, you're like, oh, well, you know, I'll take the money from the recreational, or, oh, actually, oh, wait, there's a better game there. So I'll just quit this table and add this table because the money is easier. Does that make sense? Can any of you two relate?
Yeah, no, 100%. Like 6-max. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times people tried to talk me into like playing tighter when like Stefan 3-bet me or something. And they were just like if we were like looking over hands, and they're just like, I know you're not going to take this advice, but like this hand is like a 0 EV mix. You don't have to play it. Like you can just stay out of his way. Like
this is 6-max mentality right there. I'm like, listen, you know, you have the table. There's money there, and you kind of have to maneuver through the table to get the highest EV spots. That's really a 6-max mentality, not a heads-up mentality.
Yeah, but like there's this amazing thing Clicker said to me when I was talking to him afterwards about the Doug match. And it was like, how was it? It was said something like, heads up, there's nowhere to hide. You can lock your doors, lock your windows. I'll come in through your floorboards. And yeah, so I just have this like image of like I don't know if you've seen like there's like an article of like Clicker when he went to the WSOP and he's wearing like a cowboy hat or something. And I just have an image of like that guy, like, you know, like as like a horror movie character, like climbing up through the floorboards to take your bankroll. And yeah, that's the idea. Like you're gonna get in somehow. Like they have to leave an opening somewhere if they wanna close one somewhere else.
Yeah, I think it's also like a more direct conflict. You're almost both going in there with an assumption that I've got a better strategy than you, and that they're claiming the other thing, and then you're going to test it against each other. And there's no hiding place. Either it's a stalemate, or someone's got an edge on the other player, and there's lots invested in that. The longer you play, the more invested you are in your assumption being correct. And unless you're going in there for a learning experience, like you playing Linus or somebody where you're maybe taking it for granted that they have an edge, most of the time you're going in there to beat that other person. So yeah, it's a direct conflict in some avenues, which can definitely create a intense emotional reaction, both winning and losing.
I can actually strongly relate as well. Like if I would be playing 3-handed, you'd be very, very focused. And let's say a recreational joins the table. Yeah, it's somehow you take a step back. Drops. Somehow it's like, and then when you take a step back, you're less focused. You actually start to make more mistakes, and then you actually are less of a winner than when you were playing very tough lineup 3-handed, for example.
Yeah, that was exactly what I just noticed about myself. Where I was just like, I'd have all of these like, you know, allegedly very good tables, and I would just be like blundering or like missing things which I'd usually catch. And I think it's just because I felt like I just was making money just for showing up, because there was a spot at the table. So yeah, and that was why I kind of decided that I was just gonna, why I was gonna just play everyone. And it kind of means that now, like, if a recreational comes along, I'm still trying to like maintain that sort of like, you know, predator mentality, right? Where it's just like, yeah, it's like I've earned this table by getting people to not play me, you know, like I've earned the open sit, and like now they have to come because there's a recreational. Okay, like now that they have to play me, like now I'm gonna crush them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was, I remember also, that was at some point I started to notice this, and every time when the table would fill out, because you kind of think like, oh yeah, now it's easy, quote, quote. That's kind of, I think, what happens in your brain. But then I said, no, okay, so the goal is now not to win at this table. The goal is, how can I punish the guys who now seated at my table? How can I make them, they hunted in my game, how can I make them now no longer a winner. That then became my goal. So that
Yeah,
race is
always,
kind of the challenge.
yeah, I sort of like catch myself thinking like, like, you know, these like the bum hunters don't deserve an easy ride, you know.
Yeah, no,
Like,
I can very
they've
much
come in to
relate to
sit
this
in,
experience.
like they don't get to play me on my B game just because they've waited for a reg to come and they've dodged the reg battling, Like they still, like, you know, I still want to make life as tough as possible for these guys. I want to be like a problem at the table for them.
I think what we're describing here, Adam, is a clear example of flow state.
Yes, and also of almost like initiating like a challenge response. You're someone who thrives on challenge. You want to be confronted. You want to be the alpha of the kind of dynamics, and you're willing to battle to prove it. So you almost like want, like Owen said, he really resonated with Linus quitting the table when a fish comes. Most players don't resonate with that. Most players are like, what? Like, is this guy just burning money? So it takes a certain personality to really step into competition. That battle to wanting to prove yourself also requires a lot of confidence, because I can relate this conversation as well to Sunny, one of our other previous guests who was also a fast riser. He has a similar mindset of just sitting in really tough games and not being scared of what comes from that, just willing to put it on the line. So there comes an element of trusting yourself to play a tough opponent, because when you're doing what Owen does and stepping into the kind of lion's den, so to speak, there's other lions there who wanting to rip you apart. So you've got to be able to hold your own, stand up to them. So yeah, I'm curious to know actually for yourself, Owen, what have been some of the ways this has backfired? I can definitely tell how it's got a lot of benefits to putting you in tough scenarios and learning and growing. Has there been any sort of times, periods, challenges where you've been like, I wish I wasn't so competitive. I wish I was more of a bum hunter?
I don't know really. I don't feel like, because like obviously, you know, I probably could have made more money in a different way if I was game selecting a bit more, or like, you know, devoting more time to trying to get into some good games. But I'd also like, I think I'm a much better player because of this attitude. And then like the long-term EV of being a better player is just worth more to me than the money. Like if someone said to me, okay, well, you could have like bum hunted this year and you could be like 100k richer, but you wouldn't have, you know, you wouldn't have done like all that battling and like learned like with that intensity, then yeah, no, I'd much rather be this way. I don't know what I don't know what the dollar amount is where I've become a bum hunter. I mean, surely there is one somewhere, but yeah, I just feel like it's like, you know, like there are these 20k reg battles going on ACR, right? And like, okay, like it's hard to say who exactly is winning and who's losing, but like, let's say Linus is still crushing them. You know, like he doesn't have to go hunt for a fish to have like this crushing win rate. And like the way you get to there is by having that, like, you know, that fighting spirit, and also by learning as much as you can. So it's like I've always thought of it's like the money will follow the value. If you create that value within yourself, then the money will take care of itself later. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't really say I've regretted this at all. It's probably like exacerbated some downswings, but I also feel like I'm pretty. I'm like pretty okay with handling them. Like, I mean, obviously they, you know, they suck, but I don't feel like they, you know, I don't feel like as affected by other people. And especially if you're playing in really tough games, it's like I've sort of gone into them with the mentality of like, okay, this can go horribly. Like even if I'm winning, this can go horribly because these are good players, right? Like that, and the standard deviation is going to be huge. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for you, it's clear that the long-term goal is to be as good as possible, be the best version of yourself,
Yeah,
reach your potential.
I want to be number one. Like, I don't know if I'll make it. I don't know if I'll make it, but I want to be number one. In fact, there was like the reason I chose my screen name and called myself Prodigy, which is incredibly cocky, I'm well aware, was basically I was on like a huge downswing at 5K. I mean, I say huge. I was on like a 20 bind downswing. But the smallest stake I was playing was 1K, right? I wasn't playing anything in between. So I was on like 100K, like I think it was like 130K downswing I had like, I mean, it was more than half my roll, basically. And like what kept happening is, you know, like I grind at 1K for ages, finally get the roll back to a decent point, go back to 5K, get smacked, until I was like getting tilted enough that I didn't fancy going back down, and I was kind of like degenning the roll a bit to keep playing in those games. And you know, like at a certain point, like the doubt starts creeping in. It's just like I could just like smack about 1K. You know, I could just play in this game where like there's a comfortable win rate. These people aren't testing me as much. It's not as stressful. Like even when it goes wrong, like I'm, you know, there's no doubt about like whether I'm winning in the game long term. And so, and then like I made an account on ACR. So I'd only been playing on GG at that point. I made an account on ACR. And like I was trying to think of a name, and I thought the name Prodigy, and I was like, oh, that's, you know, it's kind of cocky, as I said. But then I was thinking, like, if I call myself Prodigy, and then like I sit at 1K forever, and I don't make it happen, and I don't crack high stakes, like that will tilt me so hard. Like seeing like I've just called myself Prodigy, and then like never made it happen. Like I've just like lied to myself, and so I kind of like, you know, wrote it down as sort of like a promise to myself that like this is gonna be, you know, this is gonna be correct. Like this is, you know, I'm gonna put in the effort, and like this is, I'm gonna make this come true.
I love that. It's almost like we have a real strong desire and urge to stay consistent with our own narrative of ourselves, and sometimes putting ourselves on the line like that, calling yourself the Prodigy, is like, all right, well, that's me. I gotta live up to that now. I can't sit and bum hunt because I'm the Prodigy now. So yeah, I love that.
And this was when I like decided I was just gonna play everyone, right? I was just like, I was just like, yeah, there's no, you know, if you're gonna be cocky, do it right. Like, no half measures.
All right, so your journey, let's backtrack a little bit and go through your kind of fast rise. So you went from, I don't know what stakes you exactly started at, but you got to 1Ks within about a year. Could you talk us through that kind of fast rise through the stakes early on? What are some of the things you were learning? How were you able to progress to 1K so quickly?
So I think, but I mean, one, I like ran really well. Like I think, well, when I like first played, like my first ever tournament, I went to my university poker sock and I won the tournament. I mean, it was only for $200, 200 quid, but like I won that. And then like I went online, like a few weeks later, I played like a $15 tourney. It was like a huge field, and I won that for 5K. And so I was like, I was like sun running right out the gate. And then I lost a bunch of it back, so I thought I was better than I was. But then that like really like, you know, the realization that I wasn't as good, it like actually like really motivated me to get better. I mean, I was also like already in love with the game. Like, you know, it doesn't hurt when you like run like a god right at the start. But yeah, I just remember, I think, yeah, honestly, I think I was just a bit like untamed, I guess is how I would say it, and it like really worked for those stakes. Like I just wanted to bluff people, and like not in like any, like I just felt good if I got like, you know, if I got a bluffer against these people. So, and it's like when you're playing against a population who is like overwhelmingly too tight, you don't really need any subtlety. Like that can come later, especially because I was playing on party poker, which had like, I don't know if any of you played back in the day, but it was like a huge like leaderboard grind. It was like all these people playing like insane hours, and like, you know, they're just like folding all these close spots. And I think I was like I didn't really have much technical knowledge, but I was just fearless like instantly. So yeah, I got to 1K like fairly fast. I think it was like 1K was when I first started like actually working on the technical side of my game. I think before then, like I was just like, you know, just trying to scare people, and like it works because if people aren't too technical and like they have like very simple heuristics where it's like, oh, if someone puts a stack in, they have it, and it's like, well, you know, that's kind of that's kind of an easy one to exploit, right? Like you know, it's no limit hold'em. It's not exactly work to get the stack in if you know that that's like good in most situations. So yeah, I was pretty wild and no subtlety, but yeah, I think you can kind of make that approach work for at least until like, well, I don't know if I don't know, I haven't played those stakes in a while, but I would say like at least until 200 an L these days, I would guess you can just be a bit insane, and they don't fight back.
It sounds like your natural fearlessness and aggression set you up well to begin with. Some run good as well, which like fast tracked your rise. At this stage, were you all in on poker, or were you doing any studies, or did you have anything else going in your life around the time?
I was all in like instantly. Like yeah, it was like complete like I was technically still studying, but like I was just like, I wasn't going to class, like I wasn't handing in my essays. Remember I got back like for Christmas, and I'd made like 4K or something in a month, which was like huge money to me at the time on a student loan. And I just showed it to my parents. I was like, okay, like I ran well this month, but I've also like, look, I can do this as sort of proof. And then they were like very supportive. They were just like, okay, if you're really sure you can drop out of uni, I was like, I am really sure. And I also kind of let slip to them at that point. I was just like, yeah, I've done no work this year. Like at minimum, I'll be retaking second year. So then they were just like, okay, well, you can like, and like the uni as well were like, we're just like, well, you can drop out, like if you want to restart again next year. And so I sort of had this time to just like go for it with no repercussions. So yeah, I just like fully threw myself into it. There was someone I knew from uni who was a pro. Like I was like instantly getting coaching from him, like straight out the gate. And I bought Upswing immediately. Like consumed all the content in the lab, and I was just like instantly obsessed. It was like effortless. It didn't feel like work, Like I didn't feel pressure to work hard to make up for quitting my degree. I was just like playing and studying an insane amount because it's what I wanted to do.
Hi guys, Rene aka the Wacko here with a quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement. In our program you will get access to 80 plus hours of content in which we will explain you all aspects needed in order to become a more successful poker player. Now one of these of course is the technical aspect of the game, in which I'll be explaining you all the mechanics behind poker strategies. We'll be talking about GTO, exploitative play with an extra focus on the why behind certain strategies and why the population has certain leaks. And to increase your win rate even further, we've recently added a river bluff and bluff catching section so you can increase your EV when those pots become very big. Our mindset and performance coach Adam Carmichael, he took care of the mental game and performance section of this program, in which he will teach you everything you need to know in order to break through limiting beliefs, better handle your emotions, break free from tilt, and play your A game more consistently. And last but not least, we've added the management and optimization section in the program, in which we will give you various tips and tricks to make it more likely for your poker career to succeed, and how to continuously improve as a poker player. Now on top of that, this concept is continuously evolving based on feedback and suggestions we get from our community. Next to all this content, you will have access to our exclusive Discord community, monthly live Q&A calls, and one-on-one coaching session in which we are going to be reviewing if you have been implementing the stuff that we teach you in the Mechanics of Poker correctly. So do you think you have what it takes to master the mechanics of poker? Go over to mechanicsofpoker.com and maybe you will get a chance to work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. But for now, without further ado, let's get back into more goodness in today's episode.
So you're all in on poker, you're rising quickly, things are going well, you're running good on top of that. And then as you mentioned, when you started playing 5Ks, reality kicked in and you had a 6-month patch of losing half your roll up to 100K. What was it about that time that was challenging, and how did you get through that time? I'm sure people who are listening to this might go, wow, that's a super challenging period, and I'm not sure if I could go 6 months with losing half my roll. What were some things that were going on for you that time, and how did you push past that?
Yeah, I think like I was down lifetime in cash games at one point by like quite a bit as well, because I kept keeping the 5K shots going by like binking tourneys, which led to a really weird imposter syndrome where I was like down lifetime in cash, just like still playing high stakes, just like, wait, am I a fish? Like I might have been, I can't remember how good I was. I can't remember. Yeah, I can't estimate whether I was doing well in the games. I think part of part of the problem was like the uncertainty of like knowing what the gap was. Like I knew these guys were better than me, but it's like when you play like other stakes, right? There's like there's the 100 NL regs, there's the 200 NL regs, and whatever. But when you get to 5K, it's like basically everyone plays 5K. There's like maybe, I don't know, there's like 5-10 guys who can't be bothered out of like the online players. And so it was like really stressful being like, okay, I know I was like one of the top guys at 1K, and I was like, usually that just transitions into the next stake, but then I could just feel like I wasn't really sure how much more work I had to do, and like it's like this sort of it's almost like cognitive dissonance of like having like this this faith in your own abilities and just being like, okay, I do all these things well, and then but also just being confronted by the evidence. It's like not being insane. It's just like I am getting smacked every time I play. Also, there were just hands where like people were just clearly outplaying me as well. Like I remember there was this one hand, like I actually won the hand, but like this hand like scared the shit out of me. Where it was like it was a 3-bet pot blind versus blind against Vicente, and I just flopped top set, and we were 200 big blinds deep, and I tripled off for a stack, and he called me down with king high, and I was like just for 200 big blinds, and I was like really aware when he called me down that I'd been over bluffing, like I was sitting there as he was tanking on the river, just like thinking I might get called. I was thinking about it. I was just like, wow, I'm actually really overdoing this spot. I sort of only just realized like how little I was repping. And then like he flicks in the call with king high, and I was just like, I remember just being like, okay, like I just won 10K and it feels fucking great, but I could feel I could just feel how out of my depth I was to be like playing pots with this guy. Like he was just clearly completely smashing me. Yeah, it was like free-handed with a fish, so I was still playing, but it was like I hated that feeling of just being like just having to like deal with the shit someone was throwing at you. Like I was I was under no illusions that I was the one creating problems for him. Like that, there was no way that was happening.
So at this stage, you're realizing that you're a bit out of your depth and these guys are really good. And there's a gap between your strategy and theirs, but you can't really figure out exactly like how to close it, like where you actually lie on the spectrum compared to them. So how did you go about getting through this phase? How did you learn to close the gap? What were the things that you were focusing on during this period to catch up?
So one thing was I joined Gorilla, which, well, I mean that that was like honestly the main thing, like which helped so fucking much. Because like all these guys, like so many of them have been like crushing high stakes for so long. Like they're such top level players. And it was like on the one hand, it was also realizing that like, okay, I'm seeing all these places where these guys are executing so well, and like I was fixating on that, and I was missing that like they are still human. They're these guys, like there are still parts where their strategy is falling short. The thing which is different is like it's like when you see like these guys who play like every stake, it's like there will be parts of the game tree which they'll execute absolutely amazingly, and then parts where they're making mistakes. Whereas I feel like when you're at like 1K or below, basically everyone is to some extent fucking up every node, like not necessarily by huge amounts, but and it's not to say like the high stakes guys are like completely nailing everything down to the accuracy of a solver, but like they understand the dynamics with generally a lot more fluency. But like there are still spots where they clearly like are like a bit confused, just because like poker is like a really complex game, and like having that confidence to go like when someone messes up, to not just go, oh, this guy's exploiting me, to not have that instant reaction of like, oh, like whatever he's done must be explainable by like coming up with some weird convoluted process. And I was just like talking to some guys, and it's just like, oh no, like this guy has fucked up. And I also had like the opposite side, like there were things which I was working on, and I always just almost thought they were too obvious to even bother with. I was just kind of trying to like fine tune stuff a bit, and like, but then it's almost like, what's the point of like trying to run this line? Like everyone knows the counters to it anyway, like everyone's just bad, like everyone's just balanced everywhere. And talking to people, and they're just like, oh no, this is going to be like really difficult to deal with. Like if you like drag people to these spots, like that, there's a really high chance people will make mistakes. And so yeah, like hearing that these guys were human gave me a lot more confidence. I mean, of course there's also like the technical side, and like listening to their thought process. Like one skill in particular was which I'd really never thought about, because I'd always focused on the technical side of my game. But one thing which I learned was like how to isolate really important factors quickly, because the amount of times I saw what looked like a really complicated decision, and then someone could explain like how to get to the right answer within like a sentence, because they'd got to, you know, that they like the pattern recognition for what was the deciding factor was so quick, instead of trying to get lost in like the weeds of like all of these finer details. And I think that was something which, you know, which really helped me, because I'd only been trying to make my thought process more complicated. I'd just been trying to add like layers and layers and layers to it, instead of actually like making it more streamlined. You know, sometimes the answer is simple.
Yeah. So in practice, how do you go about doing that? How do you go from like complex thinking, complex strategy of thinking of all the granular details to isolating important factors? What are some of the things you found important to condense and simplify your decision-making process so you could actually make better decisions?
I mean, one thing was I went away from the table, and looked at like and actually started thinking about, well, actually, like how much weight should I give to everything, and trying to assign a priority to various factors, rather than, because what I'd been doing in game before was like, okay, I knew a bunch of things which could have an impact on my strategy, and then like, you know, and then I just like think about all of them, and then I'd just be a mess. Maybe like 3 are saying go one way, 3 are going the other. But then sometimes it's like, but then yeah, once you've done the work and you've thought about like which ones are going to supersede which other ones, and then suddenly like you notice one thing, and it's like, well, I don't even need to go down to reasons like 2 through 6. Like this one is just like even if everything else disagrees, this one will be strong enough. You know, in an extreme example. And yeah, like getting used to that. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Can you remember any specific things that you started to weight differently in terms of this hierarchy? Let's say every decision we've got like 5 to 10 things we can weight in terms of significance. Or where do you feel like people make mistakes with their weighting when they're trying to simplify? Which factors do people think are more important than they are?
I'm trying to be coy. I'm doing exactly what I complained about earlier. Trying not to give too much away. I'd probably say like one of the things that people put like too much weight on is like the exact frequency that your hand has in theory. Because like one of the ways I always look at it is like, okay, like, you know, if this hand is showing up in a line a lot, like, yeah, you are giving someone a lot of information, but until they adjust, like, it's just an option. And so like, you know, instead of spending so much time going like, oh, this hand is supposed to take this action exactly like, you know, 20% of the time, just sort of going like, okay, well, this is the main line for this hand, this is the sideline, and then like, you know, and then immediately going to, okay, is there anything which will break that equilibrium? And then like, you know, if I can't get to that, which of course is gonna happen a ton, like you can't just force exploit every single spot. But instead of trying to do that, well, yeah, if I can't get to that, and then it's like, okay, well, we can play like, I can play like a rough mix, which is going to be close enough that like no one's going to be able to, you know, no one's going to be able to work this out. This isn't going to show up in my frequencies, because like you'll overestimate these small things as often as you underestimate them. Like it's especially in 6 max where you get like hidden in the crowd. So yeah, instead of trying to execute everything on like a, you know, on a theory perfect level, just like get the theory, like have the theory, like you want the theory at a high enough level that you can like execute that almost on autopilot, which is obviously very hard and you need to do a lot of technical work on that. But then it's like, you know, what once you know these are your options, and then it was like trying to use my brain power to decide between them, and it's like, yeah, which is just worth more, because if you can make an adjustment for like 1 BB compared to if you can take 2 things which are like completely even EV and then play the mix between them slightly more precise, it's like, well, which one actually gains you real EV?
Yeah, it's almost like coming up with simplified strategies that are easier to execute, that don't cost you EV, and then stress testing those to see that you haven't missed any variables in the weighting that would break that assumption of simplification.
Yeah, no, it's just funny you say simplified strategies because like every single person I ever play or talk poker about says I play the most needlessly complex strategy of all time. Um, like, yeah, one of the things Doug said to me immediately after the match was just he was just like, "Do you need to use all these sizes? Like, I feel like it's not gaining you that much EV." And I was just like, "But it's fun, like, like And I have a lot of practice of it. It's like he's not used to seeing someone with like, like he doesn't even know how many sizes I'm playing in a bunch of different spots. And so like whilst it will increase the rate which I make errors, like it will increase the rate which they make errors, and like I'm used to practicing that. But yeah, it's funny when you say like using a simplified abstract strategy, because it's like I say this, but at the same time, I'm trying to like lead people into the woods a little. Like I remember there's a quote from Michal Tal, a chess grandmaster who's like one of my idols in chess because he's like incredibly tactical, aggressive player. And he said, you must lead your opponent deep into a dark forest where there's only the way out for one. And I think that's kind of a way where like I sort of try to play poker, where it's like I try to keep things complex and keep people on their toes, like keep and then just hope that I can make the right play slightly more than them. It's not about making the perfect play every time, but it's like if I make a more accurate play 51% of the time, like suddenly I'm winning.
Yeah, it's an interesting interplay between simplicity that you can execute well, and then the complexity and taking people into the woods, as you explained it, and playing kind of street poker where you make it difficult for them. You take different lines that make them uncomfortable and put them in situations where you're hard to play against, but at the same time, simplifying for yourself so you can actually execute those kind of interplays which are challenging to get to. I think it's a good time for you to come in, Rene. I know you think a lot about the weighting of certain variables for decision making. Where do you feel like players potentially overcomplicate when they don't need to, or oversimplify and cost themselves EV that way?
Yeah, it's funny because I've talked strategy with people, and I mean, we have people on the pod and we have them fill out a questionnaire and like we ask some questions technically how they approach poker. And we have many people who are very successful and they fill out completely different things. There is no, I want to point that out. There is no one way that is correct.
Yeah.
Because for example, we're talking about, in this case, Doc also pointing out, Owen, why you make things so complex. But probably if you ask Owen, how complex does it feel for you? It's probably not as complex as it would feel for someone who was simplifying their strategy. I can be wrong here, Owen. But does it actually feel that complex for you?
Well, it's like, because I'm trying to think, I'm always trying to think in like words while I'm playing. It's like, oh, this hand would want to go into a small bet line for this reason, rather than thinking about it as like this hand is like a 20% small bet, 10% big bet, like 70% check, and like trying to like picture reasonable lines for a hand. And then I feel like I've spent so much time practicing it that even if I like, the thing is that there is like a really big gap between my A game and C game, honestly, and I think like part of that is just because when I'm C gaming I can get a bit lost in my own strategy, but when I'm A gaming I have the confidence that I'm going to be able to navigate around this more efficiently than my opponent is.
Yeah, I can very strongly relate to what you're saying here. Also, what you're talking about, like the frequency play or something that is unfrequent. I feel like a lot of people just say, oh yeah, but this only happens 5% of the time, or in this spot, the clearly dominant sizing is just this, so you just should only play that. But in my opinion, in these sims, if something happens, let's say there's one hand that specifically wants to do something different than the rest of the strategy. A lot of players then say we should neglect that, but I actually think it's the opposite. That one hand apparently says something about why, like I would get fascinated about that one hand. Like, why does that hand go against the strategy? What is that hand achieving differently in this sizing or with this play that goes against the strategy? Now, I'm not saying that, we should only focus on that hand, but it can teach us a certain concept that we can then use into different scenarios as well, which we can then use in the tables. For example, let's say, oh, you got it in a spot where people say, oh, I have to range bet this for small. You say, well, my default will be I'm going to bet a lot. That's already different than range for usually a small sizing. but you should allow yourself some room to think about what your hand actually wants to do. It's all the hands in your range that lead it to mainly do that, but maybe you have a hand that wants to actually go a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, something which I've always liked to lean into is like embrace your fancy play syndrome a bit, and it doesn't mean you want to make these fancy plays for no reason, but look into them, like try and work out like why does this exist, like why, like what happens if someone, what happens if we take this away, and then you can you can see like sometimes these things don't have extreme effect on strategy, but also you have these effects where it's like just because you're doing something a bit imprecisely because you're in some weird line where maybe you're not completely practicing it, they still need to know the answers. It's like it's like there are spots where someone gets to they get to like range bet in 3-bet pots and like there's no raising in position. I was like, well, you still need to know a good way to respond if someone raises you, because like there are players out there, like Stefan, like Barry, like I mean obviously they're not in everyone's games, but like you look at how they play and like I always think of it as like you're sort of like prodding your opponent's strategy. Like you just sort of ask them these questions and it's like, okay, prove you know what to do to make this not a play I can make. And it's like if they don't know the answers, it's like, okay, suddenly this play is like completely fine and maybe even like the optimal line for a bunch of hands. And yeah, I mean obviously it's like the vast majority of players you're playing aren't gonna try and test you in that way. But yeah, I think that's where like that's where you can get some edge. Like you don't necessarily like there's so many players who like focus on being solid, and it's like you're not gonna get a big EV edge out of them in the main lines. So whilst you can't drag them to like these weird lines like every single hand, it's like well, this is a chance to like out execute someone. I think that I sort of like tactics. It's like you can't force someone necessarily to make a mistake, but there are things you can do which are like massively win rate shifting if you can identify a mistake that someone's making.
Yeah, I like what you're explaining. I think this also way more applies. Let's say we are the aggressor. That's usually spots where we can decide the strategies, whereas if we're responding to a certain strategy that someone lays out, kind of the approach is a little bit different. But what you were describing there was quite interesting. So let's say, for example, I do something that's quote not a thing, but let's say I practice a strategy. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this thing that's not a thing. What should his adjustment be? He's likely to screw up this adjustment. So now my thing becomes a thing, right? And the same what you said about frequency, I really like it. Like a frequency play, I see it more as like it's a suggestion. It's an option that we could take. And then it's like, okay, this is done with a certain frequency. When would this be very good? And when would this be very bad? And that kind of opens up a different way of thinking about the game. And I think a very big problem that a lot of players have is when you try to just copy the solver, you stop thinking. That's usually one thing that happens is you need to restart thinking about the game. And then actually you'll be like, oh, if you suddenly ask yourself certain better questions, you will suddenly start to think more creatively and better lines will come out.
Yeah, like some of my like historically, I don't remember specifics, but I always remember the feeling of like after I've done a patch of doing lots of study, I've always feel like there's like a sort of there's a phase in between where you studied all this new stuff but you don't have the fluency, and like my play feels like very robotic, like the stuff isn't well integrated. It's almost like I've forgotten how to deal with playing like an actual human, where like where it's like things are gonna be like largely more intuitive from people. They're not gonna be like if someone if a solver uses the wrong size or like the wrong size, it's like it's using it with a perfectly balanced like 1% range, right? Whereas if you see that versus a human, like it's up to you then to decide like what does this say about the way they're playing, which I think is why it's like so interesting the way Stefan plays, because it's like he just does stuff which is like so off the beaten track, like right from the start of hands. Like you know, he just has like all these different opening sizes. Like he'll just like see bet completely, like completely like theoretically wrong sizes, just to have as many nodes as possible from there on in where you don't know what's happening. And so yeah, it means like there's this always interesting dynamic of like he's giving up theory EV, but he's trying to create enough tactics to overcome it. It's like, you know, like someone who's playing like solid theory could have like baseline strat versus strat. They might be like beating Stefan for like 5 BB, and then it's like, okay, but like, you know, can he find like, you know, can he find like a 5 BB adjustment once every 100 hands? Like, you know, this is like so challenging to play against that, like, you know, like he clearly does, because he's got like a huge win rate and has for a very long time.
Yeah, and basically, if you think about it, where most of your decisions will start is with your opponent's range, right? Because you have to estimate, okay, how am I doing against my opponent's range? But if he keeps on doing all these things that you have no clue what his range actually is, and he knows exactly what your range is, you're definitely in a disadvantage.
Yeah, it's like sure, he gets owned sometimes, but he just comes out on the right side of it. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
for
he
sure.
comes
For
out
sure.
on the right side of it more often than not. It's also like, yeah, like sometimes I just see him do things where it's like, and then like someone will make the exact mistake. Do you know, like there's something kind of beautiful about like someone, you know, when someone shows the exact hand which proves how like on point his adjustment was. And I feel like I feel like that's like so fascinating for me to watch, like more so than like, you know, two like GTO bots seeing how close they can get to an equilibrium. Yeah.
Yeah, it stimulates the more creative side of your brain, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned that at some point when you were talking with Adam, you mentioned that you were still screwing up a lot. What were some leaks that you had to overcome in order to, yeah, to sort of earn your place with the big boys? I think you
Uh,
mainly talking about when you're playing 1K.
I was like the first thing I was like scared to fold because of people's names, and like not even like not even like folding theory catchers. Like I would just like I just had this image of like what a good player was, and I was like, a good player is someone who runs you over. And then I would just have hands which are just pure folds in theory, and I'd be scared to fold them because I was like, you know, that was just how I had this sort of like, and I had to, you know, I had to actually like, you know, work on that and just not like, you know, like thinking something beyond like, oh my god, like I'm playing against Duty, like, you know, like I can't fold to Duty, he'll know, like he'll know if I'm folding, and it's like, well, yeah, and so I was like going way overboard, which is like, I mean, it happens to like so many people when they move up in stakes, is like they think they suddenly think, yeah, everyone at the next stake is like a psycho and can see like your money scared. It's like, okay, I have to like rebel against this money scared image. And it's just like, instead of being money scared, I'm just like handing them my roll like every time they flop a hand. Like, yeah, obviously you just have to be, you know, you have to be somewhere in the middle. Like if you're just, yeah, it like it's one thing hero calling, and then it's another thing just like calling every catcher every time without much subtlety. And I think it's just like, you know, these are smart guys. They can just see that, you know, they don't necessarily know why I was doing it, right? But like they, you know, they can see it, and like, and then suddenly like the mistake gets accentuated because like these guys adjust very quickly. It's like you can only do that so many times before you're never seeing a bluff. So yeah, that was something which I like had to get over, like like
Yeah,
get the
especially when
courage
you
to
start
fold.
calling things that are just never a call. It's usually alerts the alarm bells. Like if you call a frequency hand more often, then like the other person's like, well, this is probably a frequency call. If you call it always, it's very hard to figure out. Obviously, over the long term, your frequencies can be a bit out of line. But if you start calling shit that's just never a thing, the other person's like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. I was just like, and I think yeah as well. Like I would just like have like a decently strong hand, and then like, you know, if a good player put me all in, I wouldn't even like really think. I'd just be like, oh, I have to call this guy, and then like, you know, later realize, oh, this hand is actually like, you know, it's a strong hand, but like he's repping stronger. This hand is a mix. but like I would just have like snapped the call button because I just like he has bluffs, like, you know, and it's like, well, I'm not really giving them much incentive to find the bluffs, like, you know.
Yeah, it's exactly also what you were talking about with Adam as well in terms of what is the deciding factor. Especially, we always focus so much on theory, and in theory everything is very close. So deciding factor, I think that's also to come back to what Adam asked me. Like, for example, overrating blockers, unblockers, especially in spots where we just have infinite combos to work with. Like, obviously in the solver it's very important, but in real life, if you play against a nit or someone who's very aggressive or over aggressive, that's a way more deciding factor in terms of what we should consider. If you have the information and you play against someone who's a nit, yeah, I don't care which blocker you have or which unblocker you have. It's probably something not very useful to think about.
I think, yeah, I think anyone studying blockers before 5K is kind of wasting their time. Like, I think it's just like they're so unintuitive. That like so many times I hear people from like mid stakes talk about their blockers, and they're just doing the opposite thing to what they think they are, because it's like there's just so much, you know, there's like so much going on with all of these like tiny effects, which like all like add up, and like this is the kind of thing which I was like getting lost in, and like trying to like perfectly account for all this stuff, and like I think, yeah, it clearly has a place, but it's like I think like there are just so many people I've heard who like spend all their time like digging into the blockers in one like insanely specific river spot, and it's just like, well, like it's a much bigger strat mistake to not have like no bluffs or like way too many bluffs than it is to like pick the slightly wrong combos. So like if you can identify like a bunch of reasonable combos and then like sort of like, you know, like even if you don't like have an exploitative read, but you can go, okay, all these combos are reasonable, I can probably go with it like about this much from all of them, and then just like, you know, be fearless and adjust later, rather than trying to wait, like work out the perfect one and just be like, okay, like this is the one I go, and then like you're B gaming for a second and you miss it, and then suddenly you're a nit because like you missed this like specific blocker combo which was supposed to do something else, and then it's like, okay, well, you know, now for this session I've just been less aggressive than I should be. I saw like Phil Galfond talking about this thing where it's like the way he rated his sessions was like, you know, what, like one of them was like how accurately he was playing, but also it's just like how much he was like the power, I think he talked about, which is like going for spots, like, you know, going for spots fearlessly and like not worrying, like, you know, like playing in a way which he knew was like making EV without being like overly paranoid about the outcome, and stuff like that is like way more important to like keep up your aggression to a proper level and like force people to pay you off and like force, like, you know, and win pots, than it is to like, you know, get some magical blocker play. Like, completely correct.
Yeah, and also in your decision-making process, let's say, for example, you look at spot like, and you end up like, this is usually what happens to me, like, okay, this seems very close. And that's when it's already closed, then suddenly like smaller things can start to take place. Like, yeah, okay, this hand is maybe not ideal, but you arrived at by first thinking about other variables, and then you arrive to the conclusion, okay, it's very close. And it's very close, then we could maybe see like, okay, well, I have this blocker, I have that blocker, maybe there's an impact, or, you know, we're playing a limp pot or a 4-bet pot, makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously going to be, there are going to be spots where like blockers are like really important, like especially as ranges get tighter. But it's also like, you know, if you mess up the blockers that you're bluffing with, even in these spots where there are like really good preferred blockers, but it's like, but you still have like a good overall aggression level, like the amount of like max EV that your strat is losing is still pretty small. Yeah, compared to just being like, you know, in pursuit of perfection, but just ending up too tight, because like the solver will always do things which are like too hard to find. I think like there are just always like these little bits of aggression where it's like, oh, you missed like, you know, 5% here, 5% there, and it's like, okay, well, there was this one, you know, really obvious combo which we rolled like a perfect like 35% with, It's like, but your your strategy is still passive, you know, because because you haven't picked up on these all these little bits.
You already mentioned coaching a bit. Who in your career has had a very big impact on your current success, and what do you recall being one of the most important lessons that this person has taught you?
Oh well, definitely Yuri. Let's get the shout out, yeah. But like amongst like other guys at Gorilla, like Bart like Grindcore has been amazing as well. Like the most important, yeah, I think the most important thing was honestly just like hearing on repeat until I believed it that high stakes players are humans too, and just like having and just like having the confidence to go out there and like try and work out what is actually going wrong in their strat. And it's like you don't have to, I didn't have to do it necessarily for everyone off the bat. Like I don't have to sit down and then like, like the first time I'm playing 5K and try and like own duty. But like there are plenty of guys who are like in a similar spot to me and like don't just respect them because of that. In terms of like strategy, so which just springs to mind is like learning from like Barak, just how important your execution of your strat is over just your knowledge of your strat. He plays like what is baseline, like quite a simple strategy to like understand like what's going on and like what the ranges are, but then his execution within that strat is so insanely high. And so yeah, that was kind of the thing which got me a bit more a bit more focused away from like the weeds of things. And it was more it was more about like picking up like all the info that I possibly could.
Yeah, and this is kind of a trap that you can fall in when trying to get inspired maybe by how other people play. One day you're like, oh no, I need to play like Stefan. The other day we're like, no, I need to play more like Barak. We had Matt, I love Avril Lavigne on a previous podcast. And he was also way more in terms of the simplified camp. And like I said, I think also earlier, you will see successful players do completely different things. Okay. Like in the end, it's going to be the execution of your strategy that's going to determine the EV. Executed correctly, you have high EV. Executed poorly, you have poor EV, regardless of the strategy.
Yeah. I think I mean, like there's guys who have like they smashed me heads up, and I was like really confused until like I noticed like eventually after being down so many buy-ins, because I was like really confused because his strategy did not seem like that, like that insane. Like he was clearly making theory errors, but I was like really struggling. And it's like, it's what I was saying earlier about like always being in the tank and like, you're just always feels like there's pressure on, like you're just not winning very many pots. I just realized like after a while, after recording a session, I was just like, oh, he's a timing tell god. Like this guy's spending so little mental RAM on. I mean, don't get me wrong, like this guy's still playing like fine, but like I was just like, how am I losing to a guy who's like, he's making an EV mistake here and EV mistake there, and then he's just like completely like smashing me on timing tells, which is like I only realized like after I'd lost like a bunch of money to him. I was just like, okay, I need to, I need to pay attention against this guy. Like he's just owning me. Like he's owning me so hard in this area where, it's like you sort of project how you think about poker onto other people. It's just like, oh, why? Like, I'm thinking of it as like, a chess game and trying to complicate the position. And then he's doing that thing of like, he's going straight to something which just supersedes everything else, where it's just like, oh, I took some like weird timing which allows him to hand read me down to like very specific range, and then he can make a very accurate decision against that range, and which is why I was always in like constantly in these tough spots. And like I find one of the things which is always like scary if you're playing someone heads up is when you have a combination of you are seeing some huge bluffs from them, but you're also getting like value tricked where they're like massively overplaying hands, and then they're also like giving up some pure bluffs in other spots where it would have looked inviting and you had the hand, and like you have like all this going on, and it's like it feels like the guys inside your head
Yeah.
Like,
Especially
just,
when you call light in the spot where he went in, and then
yeah,
you were
yeah.
like, okay, now this is the spot I'm going to call him, and then he gives up. It's like,
Yeah.
okay.
I had like, there was one like really specific hand where I didn't even like, I hadn't even made a hand, but I was just like so sure I was calling down, and like the guy like snap gave up like a pure follow through, and I was just like, I just felt like I was just like, wait, how am I like, how has he done this? Because it like, he felt like the rest of the match he'd been like super aggro, and I was like, wait, how has he not gone with his hand? Like, and then yeah, and that was the kind of thing which made me get like really paranoid and start like recording the session and going over it afterwards. And I was like, oh, like, okay, I guess I was just like I was just making all my obvious decisions within like 1 second, and then like, you know, tanking when I actually had one. I was just like, okay, like maybe I need to maybe I need to be a bit more like respectful of that area of the game. Like, just because I haven't worked on it doesn't mean it's not a way that someone can generate a win rate.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because obviously, let's say you evaluate someone's level, you evaluate it through the eyes that you're evaluating it with. Like, oh, I look at this game. Theoretically, he makes this a lot of mistakes, but let's say he's still a big winning player. Well, there's most probably there's indeed an error, like for example what you mentioned with timing tells, that you don't really evaluate in terms of when evaluating how good a player is. But if he's still winning, and to you terms of like he's a good player, he's actually not a good player, then what's going on? There's probably something to learn there.
Yeah. It's like well, one of the things which I've always sort of tried to bear in mind is like that you don't want to like I hear so often like poker players talk about how shit everyone else is. They're always just like, oh, like he's just a dirty sun runner. I don't know how he's playing these stakes. And like, sure, some people are running well. Like, some people are on heaters, but I think also like, even if you don't think someone's good, there's probably areas of the game that they're executing really well in. And so to always keep an open mind, like be prepared to learn from your competition.
So basically, you can almost learn more from people who play bad, but who are winning, because apparently, in terms of your evaluation, you think they're bad, but they're winning. So probably there's something you can learn there.
Yeah. I mean, there's also like, there can also be these sort of rock paper scissors effects where like you know, you can have a win rate against someone because you sort of match up well against them stylistically. But like, I mean, even just on a really simple level, there are some people who I know who are like, they're insane at exploiting fish. Like, they take lines and like win pots from fish that like get their stack so fast. And so it's like, if you're at the table with them, it's not necessarily your win rate within like a given hand is like massively affected, but it's like you're just going to get less hands against this fish because this guy's going to stack them first, like so consistently. And so then it's like, and then when you start evaluating win rate in six max, it's like they could be winning by more than you. And I was saying actually, yeah, which I neglected for ages. Yeah, actually, that was something which Grindcore Bart taught me. Was like, he had all of the like, he can pick up so much info on a fish, and he'll just be able to like, he'll be able to tell you what mood they're in from like just from like how quickly they're acting pre-flop. He'll just be like, oh, this guy, like, you know, he limped really fast, and like he snap called when I like ISO'd him, and it's just like, clearly he's in like a bit more of a gambling mood. Like, this is likely like a very gambly hand which really shouldn't be here. Like, you know, like this fish is probably a bit tilted. This is more 7-3 suited than like 10-9 suited sort of range. And it's just like, this stuff like never even occurred to me, you know, like this sort of like level of insight into how someone is you know, how someone is thinking about the game. But like, obviously, you know, with fish you can draw these like really strong assumptions. I mean, like, you know, also like he has like, you know, amazing you know, like there's amazing theory siding. You can do this to regs as well, but it's just like fish, like there's like such an upper bound to how much you can to like how far you can go in that regard.
Actually, I noticed this especially also with what you mentioned with timing. Let's say I make a video or play something at lower stakes. I see this way more often, where I evaluate players playing at lower stakes. I'm like, whoa, timing tell here, timing tell that, timing. Like everything is like, oh, everyone is just play every time telling you exactly what kind of range they have. But when you move up, then I do my day-to-day game, and I'm like, I don't really see that. I don't really see it as much as I see at lower stakes.
Yeah, I think as well, like, I mean, I don't mean to sound like incredibly condescending, but like lower stakes players kind of have a bit less to think about. You know, like so it's like their timing tells naturally get less balanced because like there's less, they're thinking about less with their strategy. You know, a lot of the time I think like people just like, you know, if you just take like an extreme example, you go down to 10 NL. If a guy flops an open ender, he's just gonna bet it. You know, like there's not really like evaluating all these other lines. So I think sometimes people at high stakes sort of get balanced in this regard a bit by accident. Because it's like it's like they're actually there just is there is enough to their strategy that like, you know, even the obvious decisions they're like questioning them and like making sure it's not just obvious but it's correct as well, rather than just like autopilot clicking.
I'm always curious, what a successful player like yourself, what does a day-to-day look like in the life of Owen?
It's pretty inconsistent these days, to be honest.
Maybe back
Yeah.
in a time when you were more consistent.
I don't really think that's ever been a thing, actually. I don't know. I kind of, yeah. I get up and just like see what mood I'm in, to be honest. If I'm usually in the mood to play, but I don't really have set days off. Just if I just don't have the energy for it, I take a day off. But like I feel like that leads to me playing a lot more and also feeling less burnt out because I don't feel like obligated to play at all. I'm always just like playing just because I'm motivated.
And you're motivated enough in general to that it doesn't suffer from any volume issues.
I mean, I've just always been quite a low volume player, to be honest. Like yeah, I remember I was like, there's a time when I was like playing 200 NL or something. And someone was like advertising a CFP, and I talked to them about it. And one of the first things they said is you have to play 50,000 hands a month. I was like, I can give you 30,000 back then. And this is when I was playing Zoom as well. I was like, I can play like, and they were like, no, you have to play 50K to be part of it. And I was just like, I will just punt if I play that many.
Yeah, I don't think that is the. For example, when I had my CFP, I didn't have any. I would just agree. I want to see like the effort being put in of a professional poker player. But yeah, some people are just naturally better at playing more tables, less tables, putting in more volume. So if I'm going to force more hands onto someone, it's maybe not the correct way. Like if someone is only playing 5,000 hands in less 3 months, I'm going to point out, hey, listen, 5,000 hands is not correct. But if someone puts in 300K hands, I will probably also say, hey, buddy, maybe we should tweak something here.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think one of the things when I was like back when I was like on a downswing, I was like sort of exacerbating it because I wanted to make all the money back. So I was playing like 6 tables, or like as much action as I could get. Like I'd have like 4 5K tables open and then like 2 1K tables on the side. And then like when I go on a downswing from 5K, I would then have like, you know, 10 or like maybe sometimes even more 1K tables open, which I know to some people isn't even that insane, but I just can't handle that many tables and I start playing really badly because it's like, it's not like my, you know, it's not like the way I want to play changes. Like I'm still trying to play like on this, like, you know, on a knife edge of like, you know, between like punting and brilliance. But then you're playing like 10 tables and like the balance starts quickly shifting towards punting because there's a reason these plays are low frequency, you know.
Yeah. I think the more standardized your game is, the more tables you can handle and the more room for creativity you allow yourself, the more you just are capped with a certain amount of tables, certain amount of volume.
Yeah, I mean there are some guys who like, I think it's like Cameron Couch or Ishtar, who he plays like 12 tables of 1K and he still seems to play at like a pretty, like, you know, pretty good level. Like he's clearly like thinking through hands. He doesn't feel like he's on autopilot, and like that just blows my mind. Like it's obviously like, you know, it's a different type of skill to, you know, some of these like high stakes guys who can play like one table to like, you know, they're trying to play one table, well, not necessarily one table, but they're trying to play like 2, maybe 3 tables perfectly. But like he's playing 12 tables to like a really high efficiency, and it's like I don't think I have that in me.
But I think it's also good to know if that's what your strength is. Then, for example, like for example, GG, you can probably make a lot of money with the leaderboard. You get a lot of tables, but if that's not your skill, then by all means play less tables, move up, and in the end, you could still make the same EV. Whereas if Ishtar would maybe do what you're doing and you're doing what Ishtar doing, probably you're
Yeah.
both gonna end up with a lot less money.
But there's less downswings as well. Like, but they last longer is the problem. Like, if you're playing like less tables at a high win rate, it's obviously less likely that things go horribly wrong. But like when they do, it feels like you're living in slow motion. I can only imagine what it's like for these live players.
Yeah,
Like,
it's insane.
Go on like a 6-month downswing, like all the time. Yeah, I feel like that'd be too much for me.
You like many players. You're obviously also very big into the solvers, but in the same time, you're mentioning that you always try to exploit as much as possible wherever possible. How do solvers and exploitation complement each other in your opinion?
Well, I mean, you can like if no one's ever done this, they should do this as an exercise. Just go into a solver and put in your strat at like even a simple node. Just put in your strat and then just look like one how extreme the solver response is going to look. Like especially if you're playing like 50NL or something, you're probably going to see like you're probably get like the solver's probably going to start range bluffing. Like it's air. I mean like that will probably even happen to high stakes players because like the air will probably either be plus or minus ED, but like the distance from mixing will probably be less for them. But like yeah, you can see you can just put that into a solver and you can see like these really insane responses. So yeah, it sort of goes hand in hand. And then also like yeah, I mean yeah, like node locking, like everyone's well aware of it, but you can try and like run some complex you can try and like run some more complex stuff. Like you can see how like okay, well, like if we take away these things, if we take away these options earlier in the tree, does it have an impact on like the late stages of the tree? Which is where I think like the benefits of playing like complex game trees can come from. Because it will have like unexpected effects on like what the ranges look like later down the game tree. And if you can picture them, and like, and also I tend to have a good intuition for like how a spot is going to feel to someone who hasn't studied it, which I don't think is something you can really teach. I just think that's something which I like happen to do quite well. And so yeah, I'm usually pretty good at picking out like I can guess how I think like oftentimes like okay, if someone doesn't know what's going on here, what's a likely mistake they make, and then like from there you can start engineering more stuff. It's just like okay, like someone else who studied like what's their adjustment, and then you can learn the exploit to your own base exploit, and then you can also you can like sit there and like you can do the opposite, and you can like go into the weeds of like all this like all these leveling wars. But if you can pick out the right level to be on, and like you understand what each level means for like how it's going to change your combos, then yeah, like that's how you can use solvers to play like a very non-solver strat.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you're not looking at the solver output. Did I play my hand correctly? Or, okay, what do I do here? And, okay, try to execute. You're really, and, we, both me and Em, were also definitely in that camp, way more looking at like, okay, what kind of variables impact this strategy? What if I change this variable? And that's, in my opinion, when you really start to learn poker. Same what you said, if you remove maybe a future sizing, how does my current strategy on, for example, the turn, let's say he cannot overbet the river, let's say he doesn't overbet the river, how does my turn strategy change if I'm not going to face that overbet on the river, for example? These are interesting variables to play around with, and in my opinion, in that process is when you really start to understand poker. Like, what impact do the variables have that led the strategy that I'm seeing here on my screen lead to be this way, and what if I change the variables to something that is more common?
Yeah, like sometimes you can learn a lot by like accidentally running a really bad sim.
Yeah, true.
Like you can just run a sim where for some reason like your raise sizes are just shit, and then you just see like how this impacts like you can manipulate the sort of pot sizes that someone is allowed to play. And then if you can see some weird thing where like someone has like they have a specific hand where it's like you know, if it raises you, it then like it has like weird river options which don't suit this hand, so it can't go into this line. And then like you can sort of like transplant that onto someone else. You get like when you start realizing, you know, you get like a pattern for like what sizes do they use here, where are they getting the sizes a bit wrong, like if I were to give them wrong sizes, which I think is like, you know, something which people can easily miss if they're studying from just a sim library. But yeah, it's kind of one of the funny things, because yeah, when I first came up and I was like running my own sims and I like ran them wrong so many times, and then like you know, you run like a better version of it and then you see how it differs, and yeah, that can be a learning experience. Whereas like, you know, now I joined Gorilla and they have like this amazing library of all these sims to just to use and to look through, but it's like but like yeah, if I jumped straight to that, then I could have missed all that sort of like fumbling around, but you accidentally get some gems.
Yeah, you can also learn a lot. Sometimes, you know, you try to play around because you want to maybe find like a certain output. You're like, oh, actually, I think this happens. And then you want to say, no, if we change this, this is going to happen. And then it doesn't happen.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
why doesn't happen? And then you suddenly see, oh, he solves it by, I remember, for example, it was with, I believe I was looking at a blind versus blind spot. And I was like, okay, let's remove the 3-bet option versus a raise for the out of position player. So he bets, we raise, he cannot 3-bet. And I was like, well, then we should probably just raise range, right? That was my natural conclusion. So I put that in, and it's like, hey, it's not raising range. What the fuck's going on? I'm looking at the turn. Oh, basically it just calls and donk bets every turn. So I have to first remove the turn donk bet, and then we can now raise. So I had a lot of these kind of situations where you would play around like, why is it not doing? Oh, it found a way, a workaround, you know? Like,
yeah.
also in restricting the solver, you can also learn a lot about like what are, okay, well, he cannot do this is his preference, but if we remove this preference, then how does he solve it in a different node? And then often you can find really, really interesting things.
Yeah, no, completely. I remember also like, yeah, there's this one time where I was like, there was a bluff which I really wanted to be explosively right, like and I was like, I remember just playing around with the sim for so fucking long trying to get this to work, and it was like, it was not only not using my combo, but like my combo was like the furthest distance from being used still. And it was like I was like, okay, like, you know, thank God I've tried so hard to get this to work. I like, this is like a clear, you know, clear do not do this under any circumstances spot. Like I've you know, I've learned my lesson. Like I don't need to, you know, this fancy play is when we can shelve.
Yeah, sometimes the sumo science is trying to get the solver to give you the validation that what you do is right. Usually you're trying to be right in your hand, but you actually walk away from your study session with a completely different new thing that you learned, and the actual hand that you were looking up ended up being useless anyway, or in your case ended up, no matter what you chased, it ended up being a big putt. What in your opinion is the best thing a player can do to increase the MV of their career?
So I mean, in terms of studying, I would say, so like I'm like really into like theory of learning stuff, and one of the things which I always saw is that you learn much better when you articulate how you're thinking properly before you study something. So if you before looking at a spot, you like get a clear handle on how you assume the spot to look, and then when you see all the places you were wrong, it's like, you know, it's like if you do a test and then you get the test back, and then it's like you never forget the questions you get wrong, you know, like it's easy to, you know, it'll like stick out in your brain in like a much more visceral way, and like that's better than just going into things like you just have much better recall of information looking at things like that. So that's something I'd recommend for studying. In terms of career advice, I'd probably say, like, yeah, it's important to find people to bounce ideas off, even if you don't want like a really big group. It's really important to have people sanity check you. because like sometimes I would develop these assumptions, or like sometimes you can even you can have the opposite where it's like you don't think someone's making a mistake, as it like you don't realize that something you're doing is hard. Like sometimes it's like you'll learn something, and then it's easy to forget what it was like not knowing that, because it is fully integrated and it becomes this unconscious competence. But then if you have a group of people around you, they can sort of keep you, grounded in knowing that, like, okay, this thing which I've spent all this time to learn was, this was actually difficult. This actually is edge, and you should be pushing it to you should be pushing it as hard as you can against the people who you have evidence don't know it. And yeah, so I think like having a group around you stops you getting dragged into this sort of like thing where, like, for me personally at least, I always felt like I was playing against myself when I was playing. Like if there were like, it's like everything I do would be like a reflection of like, like what I thought I was doing. Like if I knew how to bluff a spot, it's like, okay, well clearly we have to call here. If I didn't know how to bluff a spot, it's like, okay, well I fold. And it's like, that's not, like people are giving you so much evidence about what they know. Like you don't just want to, you need to take that on board and not just take everything as a given.
So you're basically explaining like kind of the issue of projection, and then
it's projecting, like projecting both your own mistakes and your own knowledge onto other people.
Yeah, it's definitely a curse. Like you figure out this cool thing, and gives you like a boost of confidence, like oh, and then within a month you kind of project like, oh well, now probably everyone knows it, and you kind of lose maybe some confidence in it. How did you go about fixing that?
So one thing, I did some sessions with Jared Tendler, doing some like mental game stuff just to make sure that wasn't part of my unconscious assumptions. And I think also as well, it's like, like hearing the way that like Duty will talk about a guy with like a, this guy's got like a 2BB win rate of 5k now, and it's just like, if you if you heard how he thinks of like the mistakes this guy's making, it's like you might think he was talking about a 25 an hour reg. And eventually that kind of sinks in, like, okay, like these are, obviously these are hard things that they're messing up. These are like 5k an hour regs. But like they are making, they are like making these mistakes. So yeah, like you can come at it from both sides, both like they're humans, like making a lot of mistakes, but also that but also they might be doing things better than you. And so being like, looking at both, like just because I find a spot hard doesn't mean it's hard for them, but also just because I find a spot easy doesn't mean it's easy for them.
Yeah, you have to realize that we basically all have our strengths and our weaknesses.
Yeah, and like you don't want to just write off your own strengths and say, oh, everyone's strong in this area, because your weaknesses still exist. You don't get to write off your own weaknesses, so you need to be able to play to your strengths as much as like work on your weaknesses.
Yeah, I would say this has definitely been a big point that I've always struggled with. Like that, I think, okay, something is great, but then I kind of lose trust in it because I kind of assume that this is general knowledge now. Adam, maybe also a good time for you to jump in. You're a mental game coach. Help us out here.
Yeah, I think understanding cognitive biases as a category is important. Knowing that the mind makes shortcuts and it generally does workarounds similar to a solver that can lead to some kind of deviations in thoughts. So you guys are talking about projection bias, where generally it's like the curse of knowledge. When we know something, we assume that other people know the same information, so we give it less credit or less value. Also, we project our ideas and what we know onto other people. We expect other people to behave how we would behave. So we'll role reverse a scenario and put ourselves in that scenario and say, I would have done this, therefore my opponent should do this. So we can see how many problems this can cause at the poker tables when we realize people think differently and not like us. So I think with biases, the most important thing is becoming aware of them and the ones that you fall victim to. I think we all have biases in certain areas. And then how do they make you deviate your thought processes, your ways of thinking? as Owen did, go and do some work deeply with Jared Tendler and looking at unconscious kind of thought patterns. But yeah, really understanding what biases you fall victim to. Most of us fall victim to confirmation bias to some degree, outcome bias in terms of looking at results in the short term. Short-term gratification is another bias that is very strong in the human psyche. So understanding them, there's a book called Thinking in Systems, which goes into the kind of overview of how the brain works on these biases, if you guys want to go deeper. But I think it's definitely an important part of poker, and understanding where you might be making biases that cause deviations.
Hi guys, Rene aka the Wacko here with a quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement. In our program you will get access to 80 plus hours of content in which we will explain you all aspects needed in order to become a more successful poker player. Now one of these of course is the technical aspect of the game, in which I'll be explaining you all the mechanics behind poker strategies. We'll be talking about GTO, exploitative play, with an extra focus on the why behind certain strategies and why the population has certain leaks. And to increase your win rate even further, we've recently added a river bluff and bluff catching section so you can increase your EV when those pots become very big. Our mindset and performance coach Adam Carmichael, he took care of the mental game and performance section of this program, in which he will teach you everything you need to know in order to break through limiting beliefs, better handle your emotions, break free from tilt, and play your A game more consistently. And last but not least, we've added the management and optimization section in the program, in which we will give you various tips and tricks to make it more likely for your poker career to succeed, and how to continuously improve as a poker player. Now on top of that, this concept is continuously evolving based on feedback and suggestions we get from our community. Next to all this content, you will have access to our exclusive Discord community, monthly live Q&A calls, and one-on-one coaching session in which we are going to be reviewing if you have been implementing the stuff that we teach you in the Mechanics of Poker correctly. So do you think you have what it takes to master the mechanics of poker? Go over to mechanicsofpoker.com and maybe you will get a chance to work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. But for now, without further ado, let's get back into more goodness in today's episode.
So following from this, I want to talk about what you mentioned earlier, Owen, when you mentioned you had a big gap between your A game and your C game. Maybe some biases come up here. I'm sure a lot of players can relate to this, especially you exploit guys who go for your big reads and spots. What are some of the challenges you experience when you have drifted to your A game? Sorry, your C game, when you've noticed you've dropped off your A game? What are some of the challenges you experience?
So one of the main things was trying to A game too hard, because I think like my A game is like, you know, I have plenty of theory, but there's also plenty of creativity. You know, it's going hand in hand. I'm not trying to force anything. And then slip down to B game, maybe like, you know, a little bit low energy for some reason. I'm not competing as hard. But then it's like, and then you start like, maybe you start running a bit badly. And then there's a desire, or like make a mistake because I'm on B game and I miss something which I know I'm capable of seeing. And so then there's a desire to make up for that mistake, and to make a good play to outweigh the bad one. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a good spot is going to come up. There might be plenty of spots coming up where you just have to play properly. Like, like there is no insane like bluff for you to run here. There's no like hero call. This is like, you just have to play accurately for a bit and like wait patiently. But like when I've been in that mindset of like, oh, I've made a mistake, I need to like prove to myself that I'm a good player again by making a good play. I was talking to Jared about this, and like the thing which he pointed out to me was that you don't prove you're a good player by doing something high variance and it going right. Because even if you take this high variance line and it goes right, like, you know, think about how do you feel after that when the line wasn't strictly accurate. You know, it doesn't feel satisfying, you just feel lucky. So then you just remain on tilt. So it's like I'm taking on this variance as an attempt to solve my tilt, like unconsciously without realizing that. And then like I take it on, and it's like high variance minus EV, and then even if it goes right, it doesn't fix anything. The way to fix it is actually by playing well, which is easier said than done. But like having an awareness that I'm in that state where like I need to like play solidly, and I need like a higher degree of certainty than normal to get out of line, because I'm not in the sharpest mindset. Whereas like there are other times where you can be feeling really sharp, and like poker feels so fun like that when it's just all so fluid, like it's all of these ideas are coming to me, like they seem so great, like they're all working out. And it's like it's like the wanting to be in that state, because that is where I'm having the most fun. It's also where I'm making the most money. Doesn't necessarily mean that you can just play like that just by telling yourself to. Sometimes you need to play like a bit more solidly. And then oftentimes what I found is like if I just play solid, like really focus on playing the theory for a little bit, just making sure I've got everything like in that way fine. Like for a little bit I am just here to stack the fish. And then it's like the spot will just come up organically, and I notice it, and then suddenly it's like, oh, like I'm I can feel myself sharpening up again, instead of trying to force it.
Yeah, I think that process you went through was very important, and it was noticing that you were trying too hard when you're in your C game to almost prove yourself back to your A game. And that trying too hard is even creating more and more errors in your strategy. So understanding that urge to want to try hard and then protecting yourself against it. So in terms of like practically in game, you mentioned like just playing solid for a period of time. When let's say you've spotted it, let's say you've become more aware of it in game, and you notice you're in your C game, you want to do some fancy plays and run some high variance lines. What are some of the kind of maybe thought patterns you use or specific things you do to remind yourself not to take on these high variance approaches?
Well, the thing is, if you're playing good players, there are still spots where you're going to have to do something high variance. But what I just start removing deviations, because I can't be confident that the reason I'm deviating is a good one rather than an emotional one. For instance, when I was playing Doug, at the end of day one, there was a spot where like, okay, there were two spots. One where I was thinking about running a bluff, and one where I was thinking about hero calling. And both of them I knew my hand wasn't supposed to bluff or wasn't supposed to hero. But like I knew it was like really, really close. Like these hands were but like I knew they weren't supposed to take this line. And I was a bit tired. I was like a little bit winners tilted, actually, where I just and I couldn't really be sure if I just wanted to take on more variance because it had been going so well for me. All of these like high variance spots, they'd all gone my way so far. And so like because I couldn't make that distinction, I was just like, okay, we're just gonna settle on the theory approach here. Like I know so like I was tanking for ages, just because it's live, you don't have a time bank, at least in that setting. So I had plenty of time to work it out. And I was just like, I couldn't be confident that this was an emotional decision over a rational one. So I was like, okay, we're just gonna settle on like what I know is purely rational, because I know what the solver response is here, so I don't need to get out of line. Unfortunately, in both cases, I was wrong. Like it was a bluff which, if I had run it, I would have got it through, and like it was a spot where I had a chance to hero call where he was bluffing. So kind of a shame, but I was also kind of proud of myself of how the thought process worked. That it was like in a high stress, high emotion environment, like I sort of had the instincts going on, but I also had like the wherewithal to rein them in and still play in a way which I was like confident in.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier from a strategic point of view, isolating important factors. And when you're emotionally compromised, that's an important factor that plays into your reads, plays into your ability to almost play this exploitative, intuitive game. So if you can spot that, it's almost like you've created like a bit of safety rails. Go, right, in this moment, my confidence levels have dropped. I can't be sure if my read's accurate or if it's emotional. I'm going to play it safe and rely on a theory-based model. I've heard Rene mention this, that GTO theory generally gives you a safety net that kind of catches you at your B game on your way down to your C game, which I really like the analogy of. So yeah, for you in those moments, even though you're a very intuitive player, you can rely on more of a kind of solid foundation in those moments, knowing that you're potentially missing important factors or you're in a compromised state, which I think is very practical. Obviously hard to do in practice because obviously emotions get heightened and high stress. So it's good that you've been able to use that in the tables rather than just a conceptual model. You mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, I'm curious to know more about, that building mathematical proofs has really helped you to make abstract decisions at the poker tables or understand abstract decision making. Can you explain to myself and the listeners what mathematical proofs are and how they help with the poker decision making process?
So like, I studied a bit of formal logic as part of like my philosophy degree, and like I also did a maths degree which I dropped out of beforehand. But like when you have to write proofs or do like formal logic, it's like you're distilling things down to like if then statements, and then listing like strict exceptions, rather than yeah, and so it like allows you to build like design a thought process, more so than like having a jumble of things. You can say like, okay, this is the first factor I want to consider. If it leans this way, then I go down this list of exceptions. And yeah, it's kind of it makes for like a nice ordered thought process rather than like having things chaotically. I think as well you can yeah, I mean it comes back to like all the like mixes are just options in the game tree, and it's like I use the term free roll a lot when I'm talking to people for things which really aren't free. It's like running a huge bluff. But like sometimes if you have like, so say there's like 5 factors in favor or like 5 factors against. I mean, this can go the opposite way. It doesn't always have to be running the bluff. I swear sometimes I give up. But like you have like 5 factors in favor, 5 factors against, and then you're like, well, like I know that all the factors in favor of running this bluff hold, and then like 4 of them against, and then it's like you've got this last one where it's like okay, like maybe this is true, maybe this isn't. And it's like, oh, if it's true, well, I just like I didn't lose any EV. It's still a 0 EV play. And then but it's like so you're like you have this sort of average of this average play you're playing against, like half the time it's a 0 EV decision, and then half the time it makes a few big blinds. And so then you don't have to make this like really strict like model of like exactly what someone knows as well, which helps with the uncertainty in poker. Because I think a lot of the time when I talk to like mid-stakes players, and they're always concerned by exactly what their opponents are doing, and it's like, well, you can still use these like weightings and like probability models of like not just within the setting of poker, but you can like assign probabilities to what people know, and like that has that has an impact on EV. And you can fine tune these, especially in a heads up environment. People will give you like lots more information about what they do and don't know very, very quickly. And I think like lots of people like get a bit lost in the search for certainty and forget that you can model something somewhere between 0 and 100%, and it still has like a tangible effect on EV. And yeah, if you say like this action is like equal or greater than EV to the other one, well, then it's like, well, like obviously we should be taking it. Like even if it's equal, like who cares? And yeah, I think that's something people can get a bit lost in. Like they only want to deviate for like certain gain, rather than if you take like a load of small deviations which have like some potential gain, but then you add up those like probabilities together, and like suddenly like enough of them went right that enough of these free rolls went right that you've got up a win rate.
So if I've got this correctly, the kind of building mathematical proofs is almost like creating a hypothesis of a kind of strategy or something to do, and then you stress test that in different scenarios and see if it kind of holds true with different kind of circumstances. And if there's a trend towards if more of this, then you do it more frequently. And it doesn't need perfection. It's more like a weighting system where if you stress test it enough, it would create some sort of certainty or at least some sort of confidence. Is that roughly how it equates?
Yeah,
or did I?
yeah. And also you can, I mean, like you can do this stuff, like it comes back to like prodding people with these lines. Like you can like sometimes you can take like you can go into these spots just with like the idea of information gathering as well. It's like, okay, well, I don't know if this line is good, well, I'm going to need to run it. I'm going to need to run it and see how it goes. Maybe not even, maybe you need to read on how the population plays it. Maybe you want to know exactly how this person plays it. Like, you don't need to, like, you can sort of, the information has value as well.
So how would a player use this to build a strategy? Let's say they're trying to prod the opposition to see if they know the counter strategy to what they're doing. How can they start to, from almost like first principles, think about how to build their strategy, or think through an example? Is anything that comes to mind in terms of a poker example we could use to run through this frame of thinking?
Well, one thing you need to know is like information, information rich showdowns. Like, there sometimes, someone's showdown's gonna give nothing away. Sometimes, like, a lot of times, showdowns will give something away about how someone thinks about poker. And then, if you know what showdowns are relevant, like which ones you need to look out for, and then you can also like extrapolate that to other things. Like, if you have a good idea of like, okay, this isn't supposed to happen, what is like the key reason why it doesn't happen? And then it's like, okay, so there's like a high probability that they don't know, that they don't have this piece of knowledge. And then you can start cross-referencing that. Are there like other spots in the game tree where you're seeing a similar mistake? And then you can build up this confidence that this is going to be a consistent mistake that they're often gonna make.
I like that. It's almost like running experiments. I was picturing
Yeah,
Rene's
yeah.
example when he mentioned, like, if they didn't 3-bet pre-flop, he thought you would raise range and position, and the counter attack was kind of the out of position player to donk the flop high range. So Rene could run that experiment and go, okay, do they combat this with a high donk on the turn? Okay, they don't. There's a good chance they don't know this kind of part of the game tree. But yeah, I think it goes to, it links a lot of the ideas you were saying earlier about that chess code of taking people into the woods and like being the only one out, like taking the game tree in areas and seeing, do people know the adaptation here, and run those experiments like that you said, which have a high certainty. If they don't take this action, there's a good chance there's a gap in their knowledge there. I get lots of information for this small little experiment that I'm playing. I think it's very interesting. Could lead to a lot of thought process for players watching this. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting avenue. I want to change the conversation a little bit towards life design. And you mentioned how it's important to design your lifestyle in alignment with your goals and your values, and then trending towards a place of happiness. This is the questionnaire you did for us.
Yeah,
So in terms of how you go about the process of that, how do you prioritize your goals and align them with your values? What are some of the things you've done to get some clarity on this?
So every now and then, I take a bunch of psychedelics and think about life. And I mean, like, yeah, there was one time when I was in uni, and first time taking any psychedelics, and I was thinking about like, okay, so what are the sort of abstract things that are important to me? I was like, well, like, there's obviously like, so I basically like boiled it down to like, time with my friends and family, and then like aesthetic pleasures like music and fashion, and then competing. And so those were like the three sort of main things where I was just like, if I got to do all those, or like not necessarily competing with other people, but sort of like competing with myself. Like there's like there's a Socrates quote where it's saying like I'm gonna completely butcher it, but like it's about like it's a shame for a man not to have seen his body at his peak, and like he's talking about like, allegedly talking about athleticism, which is why all the statues of him, he's like ripped and has massive abs. But like, I think as well, like, in terms of like, it's a shame not to see your potential. And so like, yeah, I looked across like those three things, and I was like, these are the three areas of my life that I like need to satisfy in order to be, in order to be happy. Like, if any of these fall short, then I'm gonna, in some way feel a bit lost. And like, it's not like I'm doing it always perfectly, but whenever I'm feeling a bit unsatisfied with things, it usually comes back to like, there's one aspect of that I'm like, that I'm not catering to in some way. And so like,
Yeah, I think it's so important to align our lives with the things that we value most. And most of us have 3 to 5 real core buckets of values. We could subdivide those if we wanted to. I remember at the start of this conversation, you mentioned the poker pursuit was a little bit around almost fulfilling your potential that you did in the chess, which goes in this kind of competition area. And that's one of those things that where if we ignore these like real intrinsic drives of what we want to do and what motivates us to take action, you've mentioned how you're always motivated to play poker. If we ignore things that are really important, like whether you take psychedelics to figure this out, or you sit and contemplate, or you do reflecting on the things you value most, when you understand which of the things matter to me most and how do I create a life on average in alignment with those things, I think it creates a much more, like you said, trending towards happiness. Great terminology. That's what we want to be, trending towards happiness. So for you, what are some of the things you need to be doing on a regular basis, or how do you create alignment with those values? What are some of the things that are important to you on a daily, weekly, yearly basis to live in alignment?
I think honestly, right now, it feels pretty blessed because I have like a lot of free time to go see my friends, and like, you know, I don't really have many expenses because I'm like a young guy. I don't really have any dependents or anything. So like, you know, if I want some clothes or like whatever, if I want to, you know, if I want to just spend a day chilling, like listening to like music or watching films, like I can. So I feel like I'm, I feel like I'm kind of living my dream right now, to be honest. Like I feel like I don't have to, I don't have to work too hard. Like in the past, I've had times where I got like too lost in the competitiveness side of things, and then like I think like the burnout comes from when like the competitiveness is unfulfilled, but like I'm also like, you know, so driven to correct that side that like the rest of my life starts like, you know, slipping. Like I neglect seeing friends, and like I like wasn't doing things like other than poker, and then like when that balance starts to slip, it's like, yeah, I mean yeah, it's obviously difficult, but I think it's like right now it sort of feels like as long as as long as I take away from the things other than poker, like poker just takes care of itself. Like I just make sure like make sure I'm like relaxing and staying away from the table, and then it's like effortless to get back to it for me, to be honest.
Yeah, I like that. When you said when you take care of the things away from tables, the poker things take care of themselves. And I'm trying to think of a way to relate this to some players who maybe struggle with this, because I've had conversations, especially young players who are ambitious. And let's say for you, you've got obviously a lot of success and you're happy with where you're poker-wise, but let's say you didn't. Let's say you had a chip on your shoulder and you haven't quite hit that competitive edge for yourself. You haven't quite ticked the box of I've achieved something, and you know there's kind of other factors that are like relationships, balancing your lifestyle that matter, but the competition and the need to get some validation through what you're doing becomes very strong. And how would you, if that was you or if you've experienced this, how do you think you can go about trying to see the kind of clearer lens that, as you said, like taking care of the other things will help with the poker pursuit? Any advice for players who may be struggling with getting that balance and are maybe too drawn towards the competition or achievement?
I think one thing that was really helpful for me was sort of changing like the success that I was striving for on a day-to-day basis, because I think something which I felt a lot of pressure about was like, you know, I want to be like the number one guy, and so then it feels like, you know, that can be like an eternally unfulfilling thing, right? Like only one guy gets to be the number one guy. Like there's no guarantee you make it. Like I mean, I feel like I'm on like a good trajectory, but like, you know, I don't know if I'm gonna make it there or not. So and also you can't do it in a day. So the way I started thinking about it instead was like my goal from like the competitive side of things was I wanted to like play like the best possible version of myself for like some amount of time, and like I wasn't trying to like I was basically like ended up cutting off that time at the end of sessions where like you're like really pushing yourself to burnout, where like you're playing when you're like too tired and you're like not on a high win rate. So like it's not even making you that much in terms of hourly. And I started thinking about that, and I was like, well, this time is unsatisfying to me. It goes wrong more often, and it's interfering with my ability to, you know, to live the rest of my life the way I want it to. So then, like for a while, like I cut it down like really extremely. I was just like, my goal is to play like maximum 3 hours, but to just play like 3 hours where like I executed as well as I possibly could for 3 hours on a day, and then I was like banned from playing for the rest of the day. That didn't really work for very long, because when I started doing that, I was like, oh, I'm playing like so well in this time that it's like so satisfying. Like I don't feel like exhausted at all. And so now, like, I usually like, I have like 5 hours where like I'm like trying to, compete as like hard as I can, and then like, there's like some like maybe like 1 to 3 hours of studying, and then like that's like an 8 hour workday, and then like the rest of the time, like, very relaxed, like do whatever takes my fancy, like hang out with friends, like but yeah, it's more about just playing like these short, like really like really rewarding amounts of time, rather than just like grinding until we reach the goal. Like yeah, just recognizing that like, the goal will happen like piece by piece, rather than in one big swoop. Which yeah, you're not even making progress here. Yeah, it's saying like those last 2 hours, it's like you're not learning anything. Like, I'm not trying to train my autopilot. I'm not trying to become like a massive multi-tabler. I'm trying to increase like the ceiling at which I play. So yeah, it was just pointless anyway. So I decided to just get rid of it.
Yeah, I think the bigger your goal and the more kind of long term the goal, the more you need to break it down or reframe it into small wins and kind of process driven actions. So if you think of your goal to be the best player in the world, like that's a long path to misery. If you hold yourself to the standard, I only win if that is true. Like everything else is a fail on the way to that standard. You can see very quickly how that's going to lead to a very unfulfilling pursuit of that goal. However, if you can break it down into winnable days, winnable moments, action steps you can take on a regular basis to get you to that goal, I think especially for big goals, it becomes much more important. I think there's definitely space for having deadlines towards smaller goals, especially ones that you have more control over. But especially when it's like a huge goal that you're aiming towards, like becoming the best version of yourself, I do think like the breaking it down into winnable days and winnable things to do makes a lot of sense. In terms of tracking, like in terms of how you know you're winning, I think it's really interesting that often success is this kind of loose term, let's be successful, but it means different things to different people. For yourself, what are the main things you need to do right now at the moment on a regular basis, let's say daily or weekly, to win your days? I think we need to almost all set up a scorecard for ourselves that we decide these things matter the most. I will do these things regularly. If I do, I'm winning my days, winning my weeks. Anything that you've got on your list that's important for you?
Well, I mean, like, from a professional perspective, as long as I'm a better player at the end of the week than I started it, it was a good week.
How do you quantify that?
Yeah, just like well, it can either come from adding like bits of theory, or just working on my execution. Like it doesn't even have to be huge progress. Like as long as you're like, inching it forward. And I have so much stuff to study, like I'm trying to play 2 different formats right now. Like yeah, it's really easy for me to find new stuff that like either I haven't worked on in a while, or like, I mean the heads up game tree is small, but like everyone who plays heads up knows it really well because it's small. So like there's like lots of room for the nuances, and then like the 6 max game tree by comparison is vast. So like there's always new stuff that I can be working on. Like, even just like emotional things, like making sure my execution doesn't slip. But yeah, I was playing someone heads up yesterday when the game broke, and I've been tilted because I think like the fish had stacked me and then like donated it to someone else, and I was just watching the money go, and I was like frustrated. It's like I'm pretty sure it's like a pretty good player who I was playing, but like I think I got back to A game within like really quick time for me. Like usually it can be like a bit of a struggle, but like I think I got back to it in like 2 minutes. I felt like so satisfied I was playing, and so that was like, obviously that's not something which you work on in the lab. It's something which you have to train at the table when you're having those moments that you're struggling. But like, yeah, that's the kind of thing which gives me like immense satisfaction. And then yeah, just trying to stay away from using the results to judge. Like like I had like a shit day of it yesterday, but I was also like, immediately when you have a shit day, it's very very motivating to go review it. And then I went and reviewed it, and I was just like, okay, like there were definitely some hands there where I'm like a bit like they're kind of debatable, but like even if it was a mistake, like I'm not like, I think these things are like really close, and then as long as I'm satisfied with my execution, it's good. And then I mean, just like from personal point of view, I mean like just making sure that I'm not letting friendships dwindle. I feel like I'm more of a like quality over quantity guy. Like there are people who there are people who I like have like a really good time with and have like a really good bond with, and just making sure that like I don't let these things decay by getting too distracted on the other stuff. And yeah, that's all. As long as I keep those things in order, like the other things just sort of happen, you know. Sticking a film on isn't something I really need to think about, or like, you know, that's that side of things like is that side of thing, and like listening to music. I mean, it's like I feel like it's simple pleasures, you know. It's not like I have something incredibly complex that I need to do to enjoy my time off. So in that way, I'm blessed.
Yeah, I think for you, the main thing is like trending towards like progression, making growth, making improvements overall to get to your bigger goal. And as long as you're feeling that there's things you're working on, you're improving, you're seeing your execution getting better, you're patient, you're on the process and you're going that direction. I think, like you said, players and a lot of people struggle with using results as the kind of metric to judge, am I moving forward? If they have a great winning week, they're like, yes, I'm doing great. They have a bad month or so, and all of a sudden they feel like they're moving forward. So I think creating your own scorecard of what things actually matter. Like the emotional example was a great one to return from a tilted state back to high performance quickly. Good sign that you're improving your time spent in your A game, which is a big factor towards your success. So in terms of
it's easy to say results don't matter because I'm running well. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I'd had a worse year, maybe you know, like they become more in the forefront. But it's like I feel like it's, you know, don't take advice from people who are who are like living a bit too lucky right now.
Yeah, very true. I think the best time to work on your relationship results is during downswings, during tough times.
Yeah.
I think a lot of players during like purple patches of their career when everything's going well, they're like, oh yeah, no more tilt issues. Yes, all my emotions are gone. All my troubles, the leaks are gone. And then they go to downswing, they're like, wait a minute, where are all these coming from?
If I lose like 6 buy-ins, it's like, you know, I lost 6 buy-ins yesterday, but it's like, you know, it's like, wow, I was sitting there like, oh, I haven't lost 6 buy-ins in a day in a while. Like, we were due. You know, it's easy to brush it off. If you lose 6 buy-ins for the 5th day in a row, like, okay, like now it's like, yeah, now it's obviously like a very different place to be.
Yeah. What would you say is the most important lesson that poker has taught you that you didn't expect coming in?
Probably say like not to be like fickle. Yeah, like kind of like results oriented, I guess. But like, I mean, it's just it's like listening to my friends talk about sport, and it's like I'm just keenly aware of how much variance has gone into, you know, the things that they're basing their opinion on someone, and I feel like it's, you know, cutting through that is obviously really hard because it's like, you know, I've had like millions of hands at this point to do it, and just being like, and like even then it's like your brain wants to see patterns in things which are sometimes just random. But I think like having that practice is so good. I think it's like kind of a stereotypical answer, but I like for a reason, I would say, because like, yeah, very few people in life go through that sort of like go through that experience. I remember seeing something where it's like, you know, if you look at like when people apply to jobs with like a small applicant pool, and then you just add like a small like luck element, and then it's like you add like a small luck element, and then like almost universally anyone who gets the job is like in the top percentile for luck. It's like even if there's like, you know, there's hundreds of applicants, and like, yeah, it's like they're gonna be like some of the high achievers, but it's like you can't get it without the luck. And then like not taking these sort of things, you know, like understanding that like sometimes in life like you haven't fucked up, you know, like, yeah, just yeah, it doesn't mean like absolving yourself of all personal accountability, but yeah, I guess that's like a nice sort of flip side to it. So, you know, it teaches you a weighting of like, okay, like, you know, actually assessing what do I need to take personal accountability for and what was beyond my control, so that you can be more objective about things, because like obviously you're practicing it in like a very theoretical, like this sort of like, you know, abstract maths heavy environment, but just having that attitude of being like, okay, it's fine for some things to be beyond my control, but those things which are in my control, even if they're like limited, like it's up to me to go out and control them.
Mm. Very good stoic principles there on controllable variables and splitting life into what you do control. Yeah, I do feel like most people who aren't experienced with a game like poker or dealing with probabilities don't understand how extreme probabilities look in all scenarios. And like you said, like watching people debate things that have got high variance or high degree of luck involved and thinking they're experts in that degree, in that kind of field, or that they've got some information when generally it's a really small sample size, so much variance, and yeah, you've got very little kind of skills. I realize I'm a fish in almost every debate I'm in, really, because I've got no data points and there's so much variance in it. But then at the same time, also not being like defeatist from that, and also coming back, wait a second, I do control certain nodes, I do control certain inputs, I do control certain parts of it. How can I pay more attention to those things? Whilst understanding there's a lot of things outside my control. It's like being a poker player and trying to reach high stakes. There's so many things that you can do to help your career, to move forward, to learn. But then you go to play high stakes poker and you're playing so much variance in the short term that you can't control that part of it. So I think it's a empowering mindset to remind yourself of those kind of controllable variables.
Yeah, when so much of what you do is defined by luck, like within any one day, like your results have basically nothing to do with your skill, like whether you're up or down. It gives you more of an appreciation for what you can control. Like, even if what you can control is small, like you have this evidence that it adds up. Like you're like shown this all the time whenever you zoom out on the graph and you stop thinking about like the past week and you start looking at the past year. And so then seeing that like in life, even if there are things beyond your control, it's like, okay, well, like what part of this situation, is up to me, and then I'll focus on that, and I'll like I'll make the best of it, even if it's ultimately gonna fall on something which I can't handle.
Yeah, it's almost like luck, like fortune favors the brave sort of thing. Like luck will find you when you're doing the right things often enough. I remember Tim Ferriss, who's got one of the most popular podcasts, and one point his podcast was probably more popular than Joe Rogan's. And someone was asking, how did you get such a successful podcast? And his response was, I got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. And then he kind of doubled down going, I was producing a really good podcast for a long time, having really good guests, but I got lucky that things unfolded, that I got a lot of traction at the right time. I did my part, but then the reason I'm as big as I am is because of other factors as well. So I think it's always good to know when you're, what you impact, and not getting confirmation bias when you're having success. If we interviewed every high stakes player right now, I'm sure there's a element of luck that went into a lot of their journeys, but at the same time, there's a lot of things they did right, a lot of kind of success habits that would be hold true amongst them all. So kind of understand the interplay, and yeah, when you work in a occupation that relies on a lot of variance or has a lot of variance, you've got to be very realistic with what you control and what you're doing.
Yeah, that was actually something which weirdly attracted me to poker, because I remember feeling like a bit lost in a sense of like I really didn't want to go into an office job, but I wasn't sure where exactly I wanted to go. And I had other interests as well that I was thinking of pursuing. I enjoyed the idea of like writing, whether it was like poetry or screenwriting, like screenplays, maybe scripts. But anyway, yeah, I hadn't really nailed it down. I just enjoyed doing drama in school and like creative writing as well. But like one thing which really scared me was like I felt like the luck element in those fields was so high. Because I was like, you could have this amazing idea, and like you could just just as you're about to show it to people, someone else basically does the same thing, and it's like, oh well, no one's looking for this script anymore, or like, and then you have to like start again, or like you show it to like the wrong people who aren't a fan, or like maybe they get the right feel thing, but then like they never put it in production or something like that. Like I hear about like all these things, and it's just like. And that idea that like you could do everything right, or like plenty of writers are like only appreciated like after they die, and like I was just like okay, like you're supposed to do something for the love of the art, but I was also just like I would kind of like to enjoy some of that success myself, and so like that idea was like kind of scary to me. And then like something like poker, I was just like, okay, like there is this intense element of luck when you like zoom in, but when you zoom out, I feel like it's something where like if you put the work in and you're like motivated, you're like most likely to reap the rewards. Like real life can like rear its ugly head, and like I know that happens. Like I remember like Yuri telling me that like when most people quit poker, it's only kind of about the poker. like they have a downswing which coincides with something going really wrong in their life, and then like the downswing is just like too much to handle. That's too much emotional stress, so they do something more stable. But like, you know, like say like if you're just about like if you manage to like go free, be free from that, it's like you can only get so unlucky for so long. You know, like yeah. You'd laugh at like people if they're playing 5-0 and saying, "Ah, the reason I can't play high stakes is because my aces always get cracked." Right? Like it's it's a ridiculous thing to say. It's clearly about like your knowledge and understanding of the game, and that will always win out in the long run. Which yeah, I think was like really motivating for me to go into this sort of like almost like objective test, right? Like I didn't have to, it's not opinion based. You're either good or you're not.
Yeah, I heard Alex Amosi say volume beats luck in almost everything. And if you think about any pursuit you're on, volume, putting in reps, being consistent for long enough almost always overrides luck. And yeah, it's interesting thinking about other pursuits that are different to poker, because some people think poker is super high variance, lots of luck involved. But I think in other pursuits, like you mentioned, being an author or going into something creative, it's unquantifiable. The variance is completely unquantifiable, and there's so many factors that you can't think of. Whereas poker, it's all on the table. The feedback loop's there, there's quantifiable amounts of variance, there's calculations that calculate variance. You can see your EV in spots, you can look at solvers. You can pretty much quantify how much variance plays a role to certain degrees, and then you get a feedback loop to improve and get better as well. So I think it creates a dynamic where the rules of the game are obvious, the factors in play are obvious. My skill is going to be the biggest driver. Variance, I've got to negate in the short term. All right, let's play. Let's see if I can figure it out. So yeah, creates a nice progression to move forward. How about for yourself, Rene? What attracted you originally to poker, and what keeps you interested? You're muted, I think.
What attracted me initially to poker? I mean, I kind of rolled into it, but mainly I started to get more intrigued in poker when I started to learn a bit more about strategy, put that strategy into play, and actually saw like, hey, wait, if I do this, you do that. Oh, cool. So I sort of have like this sense of control over what's actually going on at the table. And then mainly like the strategic aspect that came with it. Like I'm definitely in it for the game itself, for sure. And how do I continue to stay motivated or continue to have interest? Is basically I need input, I need novelty. If I remove that, then it becomes very difficult. Like if poker starts to feel like a grind and there I'm just executing, I mean, there's a reason why I, for example, also do other things, right? Coaching, we do this podcast. I'm always trying to growth. We talked about values. Growth is definitely one of my values, and also one of the reasons why I transitioned away from playing full time and transitioned to coaching, and I've tried Twitch, and we're doing this podcast because I feel like if you put yourself in different environments, that's when you start growing, and also that's when other opportunities will arise that allow you to grow even further. And I remember at some point I was like just day in, day out, going to my office and grinding. I was like, I don't know. It felt like obviously you're growing as a player, but it felt like a very one-dimensional growth. And I felt like if I would step out and try other things, I didn't know what would come on my path, right? I didn't know we would have this podcast, for example. But if I just kept on going to my office every day and grind, this would have probably not happened. And probably a couple of years from now, there will be other things that will have happened that would not have happened if I kept on just grinding. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. Some of my satisfaction I can get in poker, but many of well actually outside of poker, which is also actually one of the reasons why I transitioned a bit more away from grinding full time. But yeah, it was really interesting listening to the conversation that you guys had. Definitely, I think we had someone on that pointed this out as well. I don't recall exactly the guess, but he also said actually in poker there's not so much variance if you compare it to, and I think he compared it to sports like take for example football. Yeah. The World Cup only comes once every 4 years. And then you have to be very fucking lucky to get to the final, and then everything has to fall right for you to win. Yeah. I mean, winning the World Cup, it's quite hard. There's a lot of variance involved. And the biggest problem is, you only get to try once every 4 years. At least with poker, we can go back tomorrow and grind again. I guess it's a bit different. Let's say, for example, pinging the main event would be a bit like World Cup, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, one of those conversations about sports would be like, is Messi the greatest of all time? And it'd be like, but like, he's won everything, but he hadn't won the World Cup. And so everyone's just like, well, he hadn't won.
He was unlucky.
It's like, like, I'm not, you don't even have to say like anything about like, but like, look at his teams. It's like, let's say that Messi was on like the best team every single time he got to the World Cup, he still like, he still loses the vast majority of those times. Like it's a knockout tournament. It's not a league. Like
And if you look at the favorites, they're only favorites by what, 30%, 35% or something to win. And
yeah,
then
yeah.
also you have that variance, and you have indeed the variance. Let's say, for example, take Haaland, right? Currently Manchester City striker, arguably one of the better players right now. Yeah, he's a bit unlucky that he was born in Norway, so winning the World Cup is going to be very unlikely.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but if he does, it would be a very nice feather in his cap, though. But yeah, I just remember, like, yeah, after Messi wins the World Cup, just like, now he is the greatest ever. And I was just saying,
it's like, what the fuck?
Did Linus become the greatest ever when he like won that Triton 200k? Oh no, he didn't even win. He came second. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, so now he's no longer the greatest.
Yeah. So yeah. So Linus isn't the greatest. Like, I think it's Sam Squid one. I can't remember. Yeah. And it's like when you're confronted with that all the time, it becomes very.
That's exactly also what you guys were talking about. How you learn a lot of skills in poker, and then if you go to real life, you see all the biases that people have. You see that people don't recognize a lot of variance, especially in football. I'm a soccer, football, which country is watching will call it different. I'm a big fan. And then if you look at the post-match, whereas like I'm very good at estimating like the variance that was involved in a football game, right? It's automatically you're like, we played shit,
so
but we won.
It's so high,
and then it's like, and then they come to say, yeah, that is also a skill, when you have not your day, but you can still pull out the win. I'm saying, what the fuck are you doing?
to be fair,
they're trying to invent all these things. I'm like, no, you were just lucky or you were just unlucky. Do we have a problem? What's wrong with this team? I'm like, well, you just got unlucky. You were clearly the better team.
I think it is like, it's their job to build narrative, though.
Yeah, to make it drama.
Like, do they actually believe it? Maybe they do. Maybe that's why they can play with such conviction. But yeah, I just can't imagine thinking that stuff is like, thinking that stuff is actually correct. It's just like, I mean, if you were worse and you win, it's like how, like the skill would have been playing better than the other team. Like
I hope at least behind closed doors with the managers and the players, I hope the evaluation is done at a higher level, a more rational level. Another thing actually I want to point out in real life, two very important skills. I think poker makes you very humble in terms of realizing that there's so much stuff that you don't know, right? Because it's so complex, and you see indeed people have very biased conversations over short-term variance, and they're very strong opinion in the fact that they're right. And then sometimes I'm observing the conversation, like, wow, this is flawed on so many levels. And also and then they double down on the fact that they think they're right based on very little information. And then if the information is presented, they are still not able to admit that they were wrong. Admitting that they're wrong or that they're flawed or that they made a mistake, I think are all valuable skills that you teach as well in being a poker player that you don't see in real life.
Yeah, I think the thing is as well, like if you don't have the ability to admit when you're wrong, poker's going to give you so many excuses that it's just incredibly unlikely that you'll succeed. So it's sort of like self-selecting in a sense. 'Cause it's like there's so many things that you can blame it on, that if you don't have like the desire to actually find an objective evaluation of what you're doing, like if you're content to be deluded, it'll let you. I mean, it's hence why like people can go on like losing for years and like talk about how bad they run. So yeah, I think like there might be like a bit of selection bias in a sense where it's like, did poker teach people that, or like are you only successful about poker if you're only successful with regard to poker if you were that way inclined? But like I mean it definitely does reinforce it. But yeah, I think it's like, yeah, why do some people stay regs despite like, they're passionate about the game, not like the strategy side, but like they obviously clearly really enjoy the game, and they like maybe talk some hands, but like they never really improve them because like they're unwilling to take on new information.
Another thing that I wrote down observing your story is, I think a very big difference. You made it vocal, like you want to be number one, and then Adam pointed out you have to break that down because else it's too overwhelming. But you come across, and you've designed your life in a way like you come across as a very happy person. It's not like you need, it's not like there's this big black hole inside of you or inside of your life that has to be fulfilled and can only be fulfilled if you become the number one poker player, right? And I feel like that's usually where people start to struggle a lot. If on a day-to-day life you're not happy with your life and you need to become number one in order to fulfill that, first of all, it actually starts to work against you, because you every time go through life in a state of lack, which quantum physics wise, will not attract what you actually want. So that doesn't help. And you stress out and you're constantly highlighting, oh, I'm so unhappy. And then basically, it doesn't really happen. So I feel like the fact that you have consciously designed your life and just everyday experience a lot of happiness helps you to just continue on this pursuit, because it costs less energy. It gives you, I think, a lot of energy as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, like two things. Like one is, I'd say, like, it's easy to say this before I plateaued out. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, if I like settle at some point and it's just like, well, being number one is off the cards. Like, maybe I'll find that distressing. Like whilst I'm still improving, and like that's still reasonably on the cards. Like, I'm not even saying it's necessarily likely. I could be like a big underdog, but it's like a possibility for me to work towards.
No, so it's at least it is at least the attitude with which you like to live your poker career, approach your poker career, correct?
Yeah.
That is the most important thing.
If not number one, how high can I climb?
Yeah, exactly. And you will, if you say I want to
to.
become number 100, it's unlikely that you become number 50. But if you say you want to become number one, it's very more likely that you become number 50.
And then the other side of it is just I have to thank my friends for telling me horror stories about what working in an office is like. This makes me feel blessed every day,
Yeah, or that you have to deal with people. Like, for example, my wife, she's a dentist and she deals with patients every day. And then I hear stories. I'm like, oh, luckily I don't have to deal with people every day.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, like I get to, like I'm working in a group, like, I do like some coaching with people, and it's like, but it's like, it's very relaxing because it's just like, it's just talking about what I'm passionate about to people who are similarly inclined. Like, we're all like our goals are very aligned as well. Like, we're all like trying to get better constantly. Like, it's very like open environment. So yeah, none of that stress is there. In fact, I say one of the really nice things about Gorilla is like when I first came in, I remember I had like I had a few ideas which were like a bit off the wall about like how I wanted to play some spots. And they were like so open-minded about like not necessarily just like taking it all on and like tearing up their game plan instantly, but like, okay, like how can we workshop this into something which actually increases our edge? Like, and I was so nervous. I was just like coming in here and like, I like looked up Duty's graph on like Smart Hand or whatever, and I was just like, oh, what the fuck, like, it's just like straight to the moon. Like, obviously, I knew like Uri had been like crushing for years on like these other games, and like Brack and all these guys, but like they were just like, there was like for guys who have like achieved so much, there was no hint of ego at all. It was instantly like oh, this seems like this is really interesting. Let's see what we can make work. Like, even if we have to it was like, even if they have to abandon it, it was just like immediately like giving the time of day of just being like, okay, we're gonna like see what we can get out of this, and then like refining things into something which obviously ended up like working much better for me, rather than having to do this long slog on my own, like instantly having these guys who could take something which I'd like written like a paragraph of ideas on, and like oftentimes Duty would just distill it down into one sentence. Like, it would just be like some new thing, but he'd just be like, oh, but like you can just have this simple if then sentence, and that like encapsulates this like really complex idea I was trying to get together. Like, that kind of like blew my mind a little. But yeah, like the attitude was absolutely amazing, so inviting and welcoming.
I feel like this is also what you get when you reach higher stakes. Like, the egos are usually way bigger at lower stakes than at higher stakes, and people are way more open-minded because they've learned their lesson, right? They thought that they were right about something somewhere along their career, and it turns out they were wrong, right? And I think the only way you can reach those levels and maintain at those levels, especially I think maintaining is important, is only by being open-minded, by listening to people, understanding that I can learn something from a 10K NL player, but I can also definitely learn something from a 200 NL player, as you pointed out earlier.
I've had conversations with guys playing like lower stakes to me where they've just been like, you know, sometimes like I can feel that same tentativeness when like I went to talk to them and they'd just be like, hey, like you probably already know this, but and then they start talking about some cool thing. I was just like, wait, no, I've never seen this before. This is so cool. Like really and then like, you know, digging into it for like a few hours, and then they're just like, you know, like so appreciative. They'll just be like, oh yeah, really thank you for talking about this. I was just like, why are you thanking me? Like you just showed me a cool new line. You just made me better at poker.
Oh,
Like,
it's a good win-win, right?
yeah. It's like yeah, and like just having that sort of you know, like being a part of that sort of environment, I feel like is like great for my attitude of the game, because I never really feel like, you know, even if I am not sure what to work on, there's always someone like going in some direction, or like, you know, giving you like the like springboard to go off on your own.
You mentioned that in order to succeed in poker, in your opinion, you need to be talented. I was curious what kind of talents or like characteristics you need in order to succeed in poker, and where do you think the ceiling is for a player that don't possess these talents?
See, I think you made it difficult for me, because it was just like, which one triumphs, talent or hard work? And I was just like, oh, kind of both. Like, I mean, it depends on what stake you want to get to, though. Like, if you want, I think like if you're like, okay, so one talent is like your ability to work at it. Like one thing I've always said, like, well, right from when I first started playing, was that I have a talent in the sense that the work doesn't feel like work. I don't have to like, you know, have a disciplined, rigorous schedule to get in a lot of study hours. I just enjoy it. And I feel like that just gives me an immediate edge over all the people who have to drag themselves to looking at the solver. I do think like there is like an upper bounding which is sort of determined by talent, but like it obviously doesn't get you there. Like especially in the land of solvers as well, there's a lot of room to get to a certain level just by like grinding things out. And I kind of have a lot of respect for that, because it's just like I can't be the type of person who does like, you know, insane hours on like, you know, like grinding the position on things. I'm trying to, you know, I'm someone who like works more on my intuition. But you know, there are people who can do that. But like, yeah, again, I think that sort of falls under talent in a weird way. It sounds kind of strange, but like, I think yeah, I mean like the like if someone like lacks discipline, yeah, I guess I don't know. I'm always on the fence about this one. Like I find it hard to say, because I've seen people who are like, they're clearly motivated, but they're not making that much progress. But like also I'm not like intimately familiar with like how much work they're actually doing. Like I'm sure you've seen plenty of people who talk a good game about like how passionate they are and how much they want to study. And then it's like when it actually comes down to doing the work, like I've had people like back before I had people ask me to do coaching just privately. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do coaching, because like I just enjoy it. And then it would just be like I'd be like asking them what they worked on in the past week, and it would basically be like, no, the way they worked was like doing like a private session with me. Like I was supposed to like drag them to the top, and like these could be like smart guys, but like yeah. So I think it's like a bit of both. Well, I mean, like the cliche is what it's like, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. But yeah, I think if someone's like generally like pretty decent at maths and like loves the game and is prepared to put in the hours, like they can definitely beat mid stakes. I just think that sometimes yeah, there's probably like, you know, it's just like, where do you draw the ceiling at like 500 NL, like 1k, 2k, or like can this person go to nosebleeds? I think yeah, like another side of talent as well is like your ability to perform despite your emotions. Like I know some people who are like incredibly smart people, and like I've heard, I can't remember who Doug mentioned, but like Doug mentioned some guy who's like an incredibly smart guy who he was saying like, he was like, oh, this guy's like way better at theory than me, but like this guy could never crack like the like, you know, nosebleeds, high stakes, heads up world, because like because he just like struggled to perform in that environment. Like the, you know, the emotions would get too much like almost instantly for him to execute well. And that, yeah, I think that is sort of a form of talent. Like if you work on it as much as you want, and like, you know, you can't get yourself to calm down like shoving like, like shoving your stack in at 40k. Like if you can't do that like cold-bloodedly, then like obviously that puts a cap on like the how far you can take it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with, especially the final point. Like naturally, some players will have less resistance towards risk, towards variance, towards losing, and therefore they will experience less emotions while playing, and their access towards the knowledge that they have was always close to 100%. And other people perform in a compromised state way easier, like only a small thing has to happen and they get thrown off their A game, for example. Now, I do think, obviously, you can work on everything, but obviously it's a way more tiring process for one, where if the other one is naturally more talented to perform at their best more frequently, yeah, then obviously that person will have an easier time. I don't think it's impossible for the other person. It kind of depends the severeness of the triggers and what's underneath and how much he's willing to go there and to resolve it. But yeah, obviously talent does help, and I do agree that if we talk about nosebleed, like there has to be something different than just your average person.
Yeah, you need to be able to pretend that this isn't a stupid amount of money that you're playing cards with. Like you need to be able to forget that. It's kind of nice, like when you're playing online and you can switch it into big blinds.
Yeah, that definitely also helps between
Yeah.
stakes for anyone who doesn't play in big blinds. Like if you play stakes, different stakes, just switch everything to big blind.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely it was weird, like playing live and just like picking up a 5k chip, and I was just like, this feels silly. Like this should be like they're big chips and all, but like this should feel like this should have more like heft to it. Like
You would just say, I raise you to 5,000 points.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's kind of I don't know. I felt like within like half an hour into the first day of playing that, like I'd never played like 200, 400 before, but like the money was Monopoly money to me. Like not obviously not like disrespecting it, but like I was just playing a strategy game. Like I'd forgotten that it was like
Just ammunition, right?
Playing for. Yeah, yeah. I like and yeah, so it's like and like I don't know, I never had to work for that, like that was just sort of like one of my friends described me as like the only guy he knew who could play the World Series of Poker final table like it was play money, which yeah, I think is like a pretty pretty nice like a pretty nice advantage and like leg up to have on people. Like it's just something which I'm grateful for, because like I didn't earn that, right? Like
yeah, I mean it's your words. Like I'm sure, for example, I remember in the Sunny podcast he came across really naturally talented as well, but I remember he did point out, like, listen, there's definitely a lot of things that I had to work on. People kind of just say, oh, you're talented. No, I recognize these things, I've worked on these things. Now the severeness to which someone has to work on might be different compared to the other, but I think there it's also like the mentality. Maybe one person had to work on it a lot and kind of saw, okay, well, apparently this is not for me, and quit it, and the other person kept on working on it and actually resolved it, and therefore still made at least a decent poker career. So yeah, it's partly also how you deal with the talents that you've been given.
yeah. I guess the thing with talent, like it doesn't, like you can get the knowledge eventually. Like if you grind it down long enough, you can get like the knowledge. I think like talent mostly affects your execution.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I want to know from you. We're approaching the end of this conversation. What would you like the main takeaway to be the audience gets from the conversation we had today with you?
Main takeaway.
It's the most important lesson that you want to give the audience before we go.
Most important lesson. Like don't end up somewhere by accident. Like decide where like you want to be in life, and like get there incrementally. Like you don't have to get, but you don't have to know like every decision you're gonna make, but have a sort of like macro goal, which can like it makes the smaller decisions feel easy, right? Like well even like big decisions, if you can put big decisions in the context of like, okay, well, what direction do I want to head in? What direction do I want to head in overall? You can like rather than living a life where like you're only happy coincidentally. Like be happy because you've gotten yourself to a place where that like where you're going to be happy, and like the way you do that is by like working out what that place looks like, and get there slowly. But it's worth getting there.
Adam, do you have any final questions for Owen before we let him go?
No, I thought that was great advice. I probably just add on a layer on top of that, saying once you decide where you want to be, decide who you need to be, you need to become to bridge that gap, and that incremental improvements to bridge that gap between where you are now and where you want to be in the future, I think is the main thing. So yeah, really good. Thank you very much for your time, Owen. Great conversation.
No worries,
I look forward to listening back, and we thank you.
Yeah, I would then add something to that as well. It's actually a question that I sometimes propose to people. I would be like, I say, what if tomorrow, in this case, let's say tomorrow you would have to hop in a game with Owen. How would you prepare for that game and basically start to prepare for your current games like you would prepare if you would play against Owen? Because people usually say, oh no, wow, but if I would be playing high stakes, I would be doing all these things, or well, guess what? If you don't start doing all these things, you will not reach high stakes. So good reflection 100%. Question for the audience listening. That's a wrap. Another podcast full of wisdom. Adam, what are your main takeaways from the conversation we had today with Owen?
I really liked Owen's mindset, his attitude, and his overall approach to poker and life. One of the things that was coming through to me was his big picture thinking of wanting to be the best player and the best he could be and reach his full potential, and how that drives all his decision making and his actions every day. He mentioned how he gets in touch with his values. He knows what those values are. He takes some psychedelics to get to the bottom of that. But understanding your values and living in alignment with those. And he mentioned something which I wrote down a few times: trending towards happiness. Make sure your daily actions and activities are trending towards happiness, and making incremental improvements towards your goals, which I think is really, really big for any poker player, not getting too results oriented and trying to move towards your goals. He then mentioned a leak that he had, which he had to fix and which he's still working on. When he goes to his C game, which I think players can relate to, he generally tries too hard. He almost like gets annoyed at himself for making mistakes and tries to almost force himself back to his A game. And he's realized that's a big leak of his that causes massive deviations in strategy, which are unnecessary. So he's got to really watch that kind of state change. And when he notices that he's in a compromised state, to create some kind of safety rails to make sure that he doesn't make unnecessary mistakes in those moments. He mentioned theories of learning, which I thought was interesting in terms of before you go do a solver, for example, or look for information, you write down or articulate what you already think. And this is really big for getting yourself to learn, retain information, and to remember the answers. I think I remember a study about this where basically they talked about basically some kids were doing a test, and they would basically be, some of the kids were told the answers beforehand, and some of them would write their answers down, and then they would have to say what they said and what the answers were, and the teacher would tell them the answers after they'd already put forward their answer. And the kids who had already made an argument for what their answer were learned the information from when they were right and wrong much more accurately. So it's one of those things where if we're invested in it, we put some time into thinking, then either one, we get validated it's correct, or two, we get shown there's error in our thinking, which indicates an error to improve, and we remember that information better, which I think is really good. And then there's two things that I think for myself to follow up on. One was building mathematical proofs and how to apply that, these kind of if this then that kind of statements, and how we can use that to stress test your thinking as well as build strategies. We did some stuff on cognitive biases as well, and talking about projection bias and how we often project our knowledge on other people, and also we project how we act and think as well. So I think a lot of avenues for myself and other people to go deeper into in terms of exploring these kind of topics in more depth. But yeah, I think we left a lot of good knowledge there for the listener to get stuck into. How about yourself, Rene? What were some of the main takeaways for you?
Yeah, I wanted to actually add on that one point where we talked about A and C game and how you sometimes feel like you're in a C game. I think it's also very important to recognize variance, if it's really your C game that you're doing, or if it's just variance that you're just being handed annoying spots and you ended up losing the pot. For example, in my experience, sometimes I can freak out a bit when I've been playing for an hour or 1 hour and things just, they're not going my way. Let's say I did actually make the right decision, but all the right decisions ended up folding, giving up, aka a lot of decisions that not made me win the pot. So I'm just losing. But I'm actually losing less if I would be making mistakes. So then I might on rightfully, if that's a word, think that I'm in my C game, but I'm actually playing very well. It's just not that the pots are going my way. So I think it's also important. And then sometimes what I can do, which is actually real C game, is then I'm just gonna force like, hey, I feel like I'm getting run over. I need to do something. I need to make a move that shows that I'm in control or something. So I think maybe this is just me, but when you mentioned that, this is something that popped up, so I wanted to quickly share it. Some interesting points that I also wrote down. Frequency plays in solvers are just suggestions, and they can be used as inspirations, what might also be a good way to play this hand, or a good alternative sizing to take, or a good alternative line to take, which is also hand in hand with what you mentioned, how to look for a solver, play with the variables, the if this, then that. That's also definitely something that I wrote out, which is very in line with our philosophy. That's also why we have the mechanics of poker, right? We focus behind the mechanics, behind strategies. What happens if certain variables change? Well, that leads to different outputs. So I always recommend, what you see in the solver is just a toy game. It's very static. In real life, it's not as static as that. Things change, and we have to learn what impact the variables have on our strategy so we can adjust accordingly to what we actually see going on at the tables. Another thing that I like, drag your opponent into a dark forest where only you know the exit. And basically, you have to put yourself or put your opponent in certain lines. Especially, I think this works well when you are the initial raiser, where you have a way better idea of how the ranges actually look like. I think he mentioned Stefan. Well, if Stefan plays 3 button opening sizings and you can only estimate what hands are in which range, then he knows very well your range, because you're just going to defend probably more when he opens less and bigger and fold more when he opens bigger. He knows his range, but you don't know his. And he probably has also thought about, well, my range, for example, might miss this board, but you don't know that. So you actually might perceive my range to hit this board, but actually my range misses the board. So you're actually overfolding in a spot where you might should actually overcalling because my range doesn't really hit this board. So there's a lot of deep things you can go into here, because like in a real solver, there's no such thing as a perceived range because the solver knows both ranges. But in practice, we only play with perceived ranges. So you can definitely use that to your advantage. And I also wrote down a thing that's not a thing can become a thing. And I have to now think about why I wrote that down. I remember he mentioned like, oh, let's say, for example, there's a spot where there's no raises. I think he mentioned the 3 of pot, you face a c-bet. If there's no raise for the in-position player, well, what if you raise? How should villain respond? And if you think villain will screw up on the response, then raising suddenly becomes a thing. So it's thinking one step ahead. Like, if I do this thing that's not a thing, does he respond in a way that makes it a thing? That's kind of to go full circle if people still following what I'm saying after a 3-hour conversation. All right. Wrapping this pod up, I want to thank Owen for coming on, sharing his wisdom. I want to thank Adam, as always, for co-hosting the podcast with me. Also, we would like to know what your main takeaways are. Leave your comments down below. Like this video. We will pick one of the main takeaways. So you'll get a free GTO Wizard subscription. Thank you for GTO Wizard sponsoring this pod. And that's about it. See you guys in the next episode.